I said I was going to make another video. It's bright outside. But I didn't. So here it is, another video. But there's a reason I haven't, and it's kind of something you probably could have guessed from, like, my video where I was like, yeah, I'll just repeat things that Amanda's already said. I don't really feel like I have anything specific that I can add that someone else can't add, but better, you know? So that leaves me in, like, a position, like, I guess I could talk about ANCAP stuff, but other people do it way, way better. And, you know...
Greetings! Welcome to Disenthrall. I'm Patrick Smith. I gave it away. There we go. Welcome to the show. We are here today with the Jim Jesus, right? I believe, Jesus?
Jim Jesus, yeah.
Jim Jesus. He is a he is a post-right, anarcho-capitalist podcaster, host of the Lolberts, former co-host of the nationally syndicated talk radio show The Freedom Fiends, YouTuber, and Twitter troll. How are you? Welcome to the show, Jim Jesus.
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm good. So, people send me videos all the time, and they're like, hey, can you comment on this? Hey, can you respond to this? Hey, you know, please tell me what you think of this. And I think the video that we're going to go over with you today is by far the most requested video that I've been sent asking to rebut or to at least give my thoughts on. So I appreciate, like, I thought, you know, so many people on the YouTubes do these, like, takedown videos where they grab somebody's video and they chop it up into little pieces, and then, you know, they talk shit and call them names, and only half of what they say is an actual argument and the other half is fluff. And so I figured I would at least, like, just invite you to come on and do that with me for your video. That way, if I say some stupid shit that that is out of line or that doesn't make sense or isn't what you intended in the video, you're right here to talk about it with me. And I think we're going to get like 50 miles farther with having us both on doing this than me just kind of responding to your video with, like, Jim Jesus destroyed by Patrick, you know, like, but I'm not interested in that.
You should still do that video. You should just rename the stream that. That'd be great.
I should just do this now, right, today. So, first
Jim
of all,
Jesus destroyed, featuring Jim Jesus.
Featured by Jim Jesus. Yeah. So, I wanted to, like, state my intentions up front that my intent here today is to learn something. And so if through the process of us talking through this video, I am proven wrong, I relish that. I look forward to it. I'm excited by the opportunity to be wrong or to learn something. So that's where I'm coming from, like a genuine, honest point of curiosity. I look forward to learning from you. I just hope that, you know, you're in the same place and maybe we can find some additional truth.
There's nothing more that I would want to have some sort of objective ethical system that I could just explain and you know, everybody just accepts it. That would be great. I would love that.
That's not what I'm arguing for.
I don't feel.
So this might be interesting.
Right. But I'm saying, like, I want to steel man this to be, like, even better than what it is. And I just can't get there. I just can't get there on any level. The kind of position that I've at is, like, I like the NAP in spirit. I just don't think that it's any sort of kind of objective, I can't talk now. Objective ethical system that holds up to any scrutiny whatsoever. And I have a real problem with kind of is-ought statements and ethics. So
understood. So I'm actually not sure how much we're going to agree or disagree. So I'm kind of, again, I'm excited to kind of see where this goes. Before we do that, though, I am curious because I read you in with, you know, saying that you're a post-right anarcho-capitalist podcaster. Okay. Can you tell me what the post-right thing means? Because I haven't heard that used before.
Okay, so yeah, this is kind of a relatively new thing, and I don't know if it's going to take off or anything. It's still in its infancy, but there was a group who formed on Facebook a couple of years ago, calling themselves kind of like the post-right movement, and they're kind of going off the whole post-left movement, where the post-left is kind of like a group of left-wingers who kind of disagree with all these absolute statements about philosophy and these end-all discussions and, like, these end-all statements that end all these philosophical debates that have been going on for, you know, hundreds of years. And they kind of reject all these kind of things. They call them abstractions or phantasms or spooks. And they were kind of doing the same thing, but they were very, very much pro-free market, anti-state. And I was like, that's kind of an interesting thing. So the post-right, in essence, is kind of like anarchist right wingers or conservatives or libertarians or whatever. That's just kind of like a broad umbrella term, I guess, who kind of reject all these kind of dogmatic kind of worldviews on things like economics, on philosophy, and reject all these kind of end all statements that are supposed to end all these debates that have been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it doesn't look like there's an end in sight because people are still arguing these things. But yeah.
Right. So I'm going to leave your shot up because I'm curious. It seems like you enjoy taking like a little bit of edge with your breakfast, you know, like you're a little edgy. What's the flag above your, what is that, left shoulder? Is that like a Nazi Ghostbusters flag? What is that?
That's my Spookbusters flag. It's a Spook Craig flag.
Spook. Oh, okay.
We're gonna get into the phantasms bit a little bit.
God, you're like a walking meme here. There's so much to like just dissect.
This one is my prize flag. This is my Bobby Hill. That's my purse. I don't know you flag.
Oh God, I'm jealous. I want that on my wall. That's perfect.
Yeah. No, chair stuck. There we go.
Okay. All right. So, the second thing I wanted to ask you from reading you in is it says you are a host of the Lolberts. Can you kind of talk about like what is a Lolbert? Is that like a Hoppian thing?
Okay, no, I think the Hoppian stole it. Okay. So I had a friend way back in the day when I used to go after the Zeitgeist movement. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're kind of like technocratic Marxists who deny that they're Marxists. Yep. And we used to kind of pick on them a bit. But most of the people who made up the forum that I was a part of called Conspiracy Science, which is now called the Skeptic Project. And the forum is pretty much defunct now because pretty much all web forums are defunct. We're kind of full of like, Democrats. And I was the kind of lone libertarian there. And one of the persons there who I befriended, who ended up becoming a libertarian later on, used to refer to libertarians as Lolberts. And every time he said it, people were like, what the heck is a Lolbert? Why do you keep saying that? And he was like, I just made it up or whatever. And so like we ended up becoming friends. He's like one of my good troll friends. And I was like thinking of a name for my podcast. And I was like, why not the Lolberts? And we're just going to take this word back even before it even takes off.
So these days it's kind of like an insult
on Twitter.
It's like an insult for libertarians, Twitter, right?
Yeah, it's short for Lolbertarian. Right. So Lolberts. And the next thing you know, like a year later, I'm seeing it all over the place on Twitter. People are calling me a Lolbert like it's insulting. And I'm like,
that's my show.
I didn't coin the phrase, but I might as well have coined the phrase because I'm the one that put it out there. So,
okay. So what is it to you then? If it's not an insult,
that's my word. Well, we're taking the word back even before it was taken from us. So okay. That's why the tagline of the show is "That's our word."
Okay. And then you used to be a co-host on Freedom Fiends. That's awesome.
Yeah, with Michael Dean.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. What happened with that? Is that still going on? I'm not even up to date with it.
Yeah, he pulled the plug on that a while ago.
Oh, okay.
Not exactly sure what the reason was. I left about a year before that. We had just differences, I guess. And yeah. It was a whole lot of fun there. I got to be on nationally syndicated talk radio I think at the peak of it was on 32 stations nationwide. So that was a whole lot of fun.
Must have been quite an experience.
And it taught me not to cuss so much, which is great. Because if you go back and look at my videos from like 2014 and prior, every other word out of my mouth was a 4-letter word, guaranteed.
I see. So I guess a great way to get started, we had a question in the comments asking what the non-aggression principle is. Would you like to define that or should I?
I'll let you define it since...
Fair enough. The NAP stands for the non-aggression principle. This is an idea that if you don't start the fight, then if no one starts the fight, there will never be a fight anywhere. So it's kind of it can be taken and we're going to get into this deeply in this episode, but it could be taken from just like a simple kindergarten golden rule type thing where you treat others as you would be treated, and it can be taken all the way to the other extreme, which would be like an objective set of ethics that exists and will serve to punish anyone who violates it. So it's basically, don't initiate aggression. Don't be the one that starts the fight. That's what it means. And it's certainly
or how it's known Or how it's known on the streets as don't start shit, won't be shit.
Don't start none, won't be none. Yes. And so it's certainly like a core fundamental principle of like the libertarian party. And, anybody that might be like a lowercase L libertarian, it's kind of the founding central principle of that kind of worldview and way of interacting with the people around you. It's you want all relationships to be voluntary. That's the non-aggression principle kind of summed up. So the point of this video, like I said, is we had a bunch of people, 6 people, submit Jim's video here that we're going to go through here, and he debunks, let's say, does a takedown, does a, what would you call what you did, to a bunch of different conceptions of the non-aggression principle.
Yeah, I really have a problem with the term debunk. I only use it in kind of in jest or to make it a little bit more but I really don't like it when I see all these videos going like UPB debunked and stuff like that. I like refuted or rebutted. I think rebutted is a much more fair term because I'm trying to rebut these claims. I don't know if I have debunked them. That's up for people to decide whether or not I did or not.
Okay,
I think that's a fair way to put it.
Yeah, so this is a 27-minute video, which means this stream will likely be 3 times that length, and we're going to have fun along the way, I'm sure.
We can go for 8 hours. I'm good. I'm
Save
good
that
for 8 hours.
Save that for UPB.
I already did.
I know you did. I was blown away. Yeah. So for anybody that wants to do super chats or anything like that, you can use YouTube, but they take a massive cut of it. We have a Streamlabs link, which you can see on the screen. It's also in the description. So if you have anything, you can use that link, and it'll do the same thing. It'll put stuff on the screen and allow you to donate if you appreciate what we're doing here today. That is available to you. You can also find us on disenthrall.me/platforms. You can find all the places that we publish content, as well as a link to our Discord server. We have a vibrant community of very friendly, non-drama-filled voluntarists in our Discord server, and we like to keep it that way. We are there to expose people to the ideas of voluntarism and change hearts and minds and be activists in the world. So you're welcome in our Discord server if our goals are in line with yours. Do you want to pimp your platforms before we get started? Where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter. I'm at Jim Jesus. They can find me on YouTube. It's /Mach1, MACHWON, like the speed of sound, but at the speed of sound 1. I used to be a tagger. Or is it 7 years? Statute of Limitations? Yeah. So yeah, we're good. So yeah, okay. Mach 1. Yeah.
Okay, so your videos. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah. Okay, so your video is kind of broken up into 3 sections. You talk about Hoppe's conception of argumentation ethics. Then you talk about Killinen, which is another YouTuber's logical proof of sort of self.
Shane Killian.
Killian or Killinen? Did I misspell?
Killian, like the beer. Yeah,
I had it wrong. Okay, yeah. So he's a pretty prolific anarcho-capitalist on YouTube.
Yep.
So I would suggest that you check his channel out. So he has a logical conception of how to arrive at the non-aggression principle or self-ownership from first principles, which is very interesting. And then you have a third section at the end that kind of briefly tries to slam dunk on universally preferable behavior, which is a book written by Stefan Molyneux that attempts to provide or create a secular proof. What is it? A rational proof of secular ethics is the subtitle of his book.
Yeah. So the video is broken down in 3 parts, and those are like 3 people that I talk about, or at least their versions of the NAP, because I was looking for various different forms of the NAP, the ones that were probably most popular, especially on YouTube and stuff. And so those are the 3 that I had to bring up. But I also had to talk about Rothbard's natural law. And we'll get into the problems with that, because someone pointed out an error that I made, but it's not that big of an issue. But the first part is about the logic. The second part is about like consequentialist kind of interpretations of it and what the consequentialist critiques of it are. And then we get into the conclusions and stuff, and getting into what I think is the most important part, which is kind of the Max Stirner kind of critique of it. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to hit play. And I've watched this through a long time ago. It's going to be kind of fresh for me today. But I might not disagree with everything. This could just be us watching one of your videos on live stream, which would be fun. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Hey, Finian. Hey, Toby. Good to have you. We are going to get started here. Okay, so I disagree with your choice. No, I'm just kidding.
Saved by the Bell was great. How dare you?
No, this is awesome. I like the meme.
Last year, I made a video expressing my concern around some libertarians only using the non-aggression principle when talking to people about libertarianism. I mentioned I didn't subscribe to the NAP myself and just assumed for the sake of the video that it was a good ethical axiom. Some people asked me to make a more straightforward piece about the non-aggression principle rather than linking to a whole podcast where only a portion was dedicated to addressing the NAP. Now, I want to divide this into multiple parts because I have many problems with it and I can't address all of the arguments for it since this video would be an epic. But I'm going to go over many of the main proposals, but there will be three main parts to this video. The reasoning and philosophical issues with the non-aggression principle, the impossibility of the non-aggression principle applied, and what I think is the most important argument against the non-aggression principle. Now, before we dive in, I still think the non-aggression principle has some value as a rule of thumb. The way most libertarians conceptualize the NAP is a good one, even if that conceptualization is incorrect. It's a shitty thing to initiate force on people, and I think it's really good as a starting point to consider law in a polycentric legal order. You'll get on very well if you look at it from this aspect. However, as an axiom for law or ethics, it would just be impossible to function and would prohibit most peaceful and nonviolent activity, and would make a libertarian social order impossible to construct. Being a libertarian myself, this is very counterproductive.
Now, are you saying that, like, if that is the only thing used to construct a libertarian social order, it would be impossible? Or what are you trying to say?
If you were applying it 100%, as a deontological ethic, and that's the framework of your law, then I think you're going to run into some very complicated issues with it. If you're going to apply it directly and you're going to say, like, no exceptions, we're not going to do it, then it's going to fall apart. However, I do think that if libertarians try to construct a society based on the non-aggression principle, they'll end up going like, all right, we got to make exceptions for things like someone smoking on their porch, because that's ridiculous that, people can't smoke on their porches because, a particle of smoke could enter someone's property. That's ridiculous.
You get to that later in the video, so maybe I'll wait to respond to that. But I mean, I disagree that is an implication of the non-aggression principle. So why don't,
okay.
I mean, let's wait till you bring that up in the video and kind of go that way. I got to find a way to like keep this moving, but at the same time not miss anything. So, because we're going to be here forever.
Go for 8 hours.
I know.
Well,
I don't have enough coffee for that. We'll have to have an intermission for coffee. All right, here we go.
Number 1, the philosophy of the NAP. The basic NAP. First, let's use the basic and most popular version we see in libertarian circles. From the Mises Wikipedia, libertarians typically claim that the non-aggression principle includes property and freedom of contracts as a part of self-ownership. The basis for this extension of self-ownership to one's property is John Locke's argument, also called the homesteading principle, that mixing of labor with an unowned resource makes that resource part of oneself. Subsequent exchange of property, e.g. sale and rental, simply transfers this right. Hence, to aggress against someone's property is to aggress against the individual. As for freedom of contract, the right of self-ownership is held to imply freedom of action in the absence of aggression, e.g. in the absence of false or duress contracts and the absence of contracts stipulating aggression against third parties. Let's set aside the ambiguity.
So I don't know if this will matter for this discussion. So let me just say it that I break from Locke on 2 out of 3 of his homesteading rules.
Yeah.
So I know that's non-standard amongst libertarians, but I think that's only non-standard amongst libertarians because most libertarians don't actually study this stuff and don't take the time to actually. Yeah. I think they just say, well, how do we homestead? And a celebritarian will be like, oh, well, there's 3 rules. It's from Locke, and appeal to authority, and that's just how it works. And people are like, oh, okay, that's how it works. But I think if you
Robert, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think if you actually examine it, like Stefan Kinsella did a lot of work on this stuff. I think you can boil the three rules down, which are, get there first, separate it from nature, and mix your labor with it. The mixing your labor with it is kind of to imply that labor has some kind of like labor is property, and you can like mix your labor property with the land property, but labor is not a valid form of property, so it's just kind of a cerebral experiment to say that you're mixing your labor with something, and it doesn't necessarily tie it to you in any way. It just means you're working on something. So I get rid of that one entirely. Separated from nature is like hopelessly ambiguous and definitely subjective and up for interpretation. And some uses and some ways of owning property would preclude you from being able to separate it from nature. Like if you separated it from nature, it would somehow impede the way you wanted to use your property, which would be another source of conflict, which would make a property system that had that rule a less efficacious property system because you judge property systems by how much rivalrousness they prevent. And so every additional point of contention you have in your property system, by definition, the worse your property system is because there's more points of contention between people. Property becomes more rivalrous rather than less. So I go with make first use, which is kind of, I call it the Neo-Lockean property rule. You homestead by making first use, and that's it. It's like the simplest, most boiled down property system there is. If you add anything to that, like some kind of automatic abandonment time frame or occupancy, like the commies like to do, things like that, all you're doing is making your property system worse by adding rivalrousness. That was okay. So that was just my TLDR. If you have any comments on it.
Well, Robert Nozick also kind of pointed out some of this with these problems too, when he said, like, look, I mean, I could just go out into the ocean and dump a can of tomato juice into the ocean. That's mixing my labor. Do I now own an ocean? No, I don't. I lost a can of tomato juice. So yeah, the Locke was on the right path, but he wasn't all the way there yet. Yeah. And I have some issues with Stephan Kinsella. I love Stephan Kinsella. He's a great guy, but yeah, he's also a big fan of the argumentation ethics, which we're going to get into too. So
interesting. Yeah. So Liberty After Dark is here. He says, all right, boys. And he said, what? So if you have a question, man, you got to give me the question. I don't know what means. What are you wetting?
What?
Travis Hallman, what's up, man? Good to see you. Okay, so let's continue. And if you want me to pause at any point to say something, just yell. Make a noise or something.
Ambiguity of the term self and just address what they mean, which is body ownership. There is a gap in this logic. Ethics is pretty distinct from the absence of contracts stipulating aggression against third parties. Let's set aside the ambiguity of the term self and just address what they mean, which is body ownership. There is a gap in this logic. Ethics is pretty distinct from other branches of philosophy because you can derive all kinds of prescriptive claims from descriptive claims. For instance, I could say that with just as much reasoning that there are people starving, therefore you should feed them. If people are starving, then people should be forced into programs that would eliminate starving, like welfare or socialist economic policies. This is what's known as Hume's law, is that you can't derive an ought statement from an is statement in ethics, or virtually any action could be justified or advocated for. Now, that's not to say that the is-ought gap isn't bridgeable, but you actually have to try to bridge it. Oh, but isn't saying that you can't get an ought from an is getting an ought from an is? No, for two very good reasons. One, it is not an ought statement. No one is saying that you ought not get an ought from an is, but that it is incorrect to assume an ought from an is. Two, even if it was saying that you ought not get an ought from an is, no one is saying that it is immoral to get an ought from an is, because the is-ought gap is a dilemma for normative claims, not positive statements. So you could say, if you want to make an omelet, you ought to use eggs, because that's a positive statement, versus you ought not make omelets because the way we get eggs is harmful to chickens. Now let's get into some of the branches of this particular version. 1. Natural law. Before he became an adherent of Hobbes' argumentation ethics...
I mean, we're just watching your video at this point. I don't disagree with anything you said, so...
But I do have a question. Well, I do have one quick question. We also talked about Kinsella. Kinsella is like a really big advocate, and he's one of the persons that convinced me to stop using the term self-ownership and started using something along the lines of body ownership. Have you heard any of these things? Or because I did mention it briefly.
I don't have a problem with calling it body ownership. The body is the property in question.
Okay.
Self is a little more ambiguous, but I think what most people mean by self-ownership is body ownership, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
okay.
What's the purpose of this distinction?
Well, because once you start getting into self-ownership, that's when I think things start breaking down, at least semantically. I think people start getting confused. Okay. I also start seeing like Marxists start like complaining about things when you talk about self-ownership. So if you start saying like body ownership, they're going to be like, I have to go back to the drawing board for that one.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I haven't been exposed to that, so that's interesting.
He was basing the NAP on
I've already learned something. Thank you. All right.
natural law, which states this particular version. 1. Natural law. Before he became an adherent of Hobbes' argumentation ethics, he was basing the NAP on natural law, which states that there exists an absolute and external standard of value, and the pattern of nature can determine right from wrong. That because humans act in certain ways, avoid death, reproduce, labor, that impending or taking these things is immoral. Again, this still falls prey to the is-ought gap. Just because humans don't want to die, get stolen from, or have their stuff taken, doesn't mean that you ought not act in such a fashion. Number 2, argumentation ethics. Hans Hermann Hoppe conceived of argumentation ethics to try to give some logical proof to the non-aggression principle while not relying on gods and governments as a basis, and to not smuggle in any other propositions other than praxeology. The argument goes like this. One cannot deny the law of contradiction without presupposing its validity. But there is another such proposition. Propositions are not free-floating entities. They require a proposition maker, who, in order to produce any validity-claiming proposition whatsoever, must have exclusive control, property, over some scarce means to find in objective terms and appropriate, brought under control, at definite points in time through homesteading action. Thus, any proposition that would dispute the validity of the homesteading principle of property acquisition, or that would assert the validity of a different incompatible principle, would be falsified by the act of proposition making in the same way as the proposition, the law of contradiction, is false, would be contradicted by the very fact of asserting it. To summarize, to make the verbal statement, "I cannot speak," would be a performative contradiction. That is, in virtue of me saying those words, the opposite must be true. Me speaking is proof that the statement, "I cannot speak," is false. Because you own your own body, to make the claim, "I do not own myself," would be a contradiction because you are using your body in accordance with self-ownership to make the claim that you do not own it. That is, make the claim,
I don't think I'm disagreeing with you. I think I'm disagreeing with Hoppe. Hold on.
Because you own your own body, to make the claim, "I do not own myself," would be a contradiction because you are using your body in accordance with self-ownership to.
This presupposes that using something means you own it, right? Which, I mean, I don't think is part of Hoppe's equation. You can use things that you don't own.
Right.
Make the claim that false. Because you own your own body, to make the claim, "I do not own myself," would be a contradiction because you are using your body in accordance with self-ownership to make the claim that you do not own it. That is a performative contradiction.
This is, I think, I bet where this is coming from, and I think I've heard Stefan Kinsella talk about this too, that your self-ownership is derived from having, like, physically having exclusive control over it. As a fact of sort of existence, or as a fact of nature, which is interesting because I don't hear him making that as the argument for how you come to own anything else. Like a lot of what I got from, like, first use property acquisition, like that you would think that would be the argument he would use to establish self-ownership, would because, well, you used it first, rather than like, oh, you by fact of existence have. No one else's neurons are wired into your spinal column, therefore you own your body. Like,
yeah,
certainly we can imagine a scenario where that wasn't the case. You could also, let me know if I'm ranting and you have something you want to say. But you could, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Kinsella. I'd be happy to have Kinsella on after this to correct me. But if you own this body property, using body property like you were talking about, why could you not contract with somebody to sort of give them the right to do what they wanted to your body? Including maybe wire a microchip into your spine to make you talk saying you don't own yourself. Anyway, these are just random thoughts.
I guess that's theoretically possible. I mean, I don't think we've reached that level of technology, and it's questionable if we could.
Sure.
So, I mean, I guess in that respect, I mean, if you're able to have full control over it, and the person says, like, "Hey, you can have my body, sell it to me for whatever amount, spend the money and blow it on hookers and blow in Vegas for a week," and which, by the way, Great town. I love it. You
but
can do that. And,
I think saying that you own something because you have full control over it is invalid. That's wrong. Like a thief might have full control over my wallet. That doesn't give him ownership of it. Anyway, I'm arguing against somebody that isn't you, so I guess let's move on.
Yeah.
Defend other people beside yourself in this video, please. All right. So
I'm
I
trying
guess
to
I'm
refute
agreeing
this.
with you so far. Yeah. Let's go.
Therefore, to peacefully argue in respect of each other's property rights against this libertarian ethic, you are therefore engaged in a performative contradiction because you are not engaged in some kind of physical conflict instead. In Bob Murphy and Gene Callahan's article, Hans Hermann Hoppe's
I don't think I'm going to disagree with the Hoppe section of the video, so let's watch it anyway for fun.
Argumentation ethic, a critique, they rightly point out many errors. For instance, if I claim that the state should be funded by a currency made of people's amputated left leg, and that they should steal that leg from you, it wouldn't violate this ethic, as your leg is not needed to argue for property rights, as you only need your mouth, ears, eyes, heart, brain, and any other bodily parts essential for engaging in debate. But you can be wheeled in on a wheelchair to the debate, like Stephen Hawking, who can't use his legs, vocal cords, or hands at all, but still can provide propositional discourse of the highest caliber.
It also seems to be suggesting that to have property ownership rights, you have to be able to argue for them.
Or if I tried to argue that no one should be allowed to have 2 kidneys, and that we should take one from everyone to make sure that people have at least one, since you don't need 2 kidneys to argue. Only one will suffice. Secondly, all of this only proves that the person is only interested in engaging in a peaceful debate in this particular instance, under these particular circumstances, and at this particular time, but not in any others. Sure, I could think that convincing you by slaughtering half of all living life might be the most effective in a rational discourse with you, but it may be more convincing to someone like Tony Stark by repeatedly punching him in the face. Or that perhaps punching you in the face isn't very compelling. Think about when you were younger and how older kids at school might have tried to get you to agree with something absurd by bullying you. Were you truly convinced by that wedgie? Did that noogie really get you to agree that Doug was a stupid show? Did that knuckle sandwich convince you that your milk money was in better hands with them? I did not think so. True Dill Tom also pointed out in his video that someone would be willing to use violence in almost every other aspect of his life, but chooses not to with you because he understands the cost of conflict might be too great, having to pay for your medical bills, legal fees, restitution, and harm that could be inflicted upon him in the process. Now for me, I think there's some problems with the supposed performative contradictions people say are performative contradictions. Sure, by me speaking the words "I cannot speak" is a good example, but you can imagine a universe where people do not own themselves, but are the sole dominion of a deity who can make the person think and say such sentences as "I do not own myself." Or how about a robot that you own? Such a robot can say something to the effect of "I do not own myself." Such a proposition cannot be offered as logical proof, since the mere, even bizarre possibility that it can be true shows that it isn't proof that it's false. So, A for effort, Hoppe, but no dice.
I mean, I disagree with this, but let me try defending it just by saying that, like, if someone does own themselves and is in control of their body and says that they don't own themselves, that's performative. But
perhaps
if it is the case that, like, a magic unicorn space ghost was controlling people, then yeah.
Yeah, but again, it wouldn't prove, like, the argument itself would not prove the opposite, because that's kind of the point of it, is that just the mere fact that this happened, the opposite must be true. That's what a performative contradiction is. So we can imagine a deterministic universe, right? Where every single person is being controlled by either a computer or a deity or something, and everything that they think is basically put into their head by this deity, like he's just all controlling or something, or this computer simulation or something, and they could utter the phrase, I own myself, or I don't own myself. It wouldn't be a performative contradiction. So it's not proof in and of itself.
Well, I think he's I think he's presuming that universe is not the case. That he's making this argument in this universe.
But he's trying to make
your criticism is that he should have stated that.
Well, no, he's trying to use that argument to prove the opposite. And it's like, okay, well, first you need to demonstrate that that's all true. And then you can use that argument as another argument for it, not the argument for it.
Okay. It seems to me he would have just kind of presumed that. But
Right. So like we let's just say something we can all agree with, right? Let's say like the Earth is round, right? And I come up with this argument to say that even arguing against the Earth being round is a performative contradiction, because in the act of you saying that is proof that the Earth, or is not round, right? Or that it is round. We're like, okay, well, we have to demonstrate that like this is even true before we could even go, okay, does that statement like contradict the fact that the Earth is not flat?
You mean demonstrate that?
Not as but you need to
demonstrate what again? Self-ownership or direct control over the body?
So yeah, you would need to prove self-ownership, but that argument wouldn't in and of itself prove self-ownership.
Okay. Well,
so he's trying to use the fact that people would argue against libertarianism as proof that libertarian ethics are true. It's like, well, you're doing all these assumptions, as they're true to argue that it is true. It's almost begging the question.
So you're saying you're saying that he didn't prove. You're saying that he needed to prove that self-ownership is a thing before he says that arguing for self-ownership can be. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I got it.
So the point of the argumentation ethics is to say that the libertarian ethics is true. And it's true because we know that it's true, and you arguing against it is true. It's like, well, wait. You can't use the fact that you're trying to prove within the fact that you're in your argument. That's begging the question.
Yeah, no, I got it. I'm on board.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, I agree with you. We're 9 minutes 17 seconds in. We're good. All right. I hope the people that requested this are happy.
Number 2, property rights from first principles. This one is more common in YouTube libertarian circles. I'm going to be using a Shane Killian video to explain the logical construction of the non-aggression principle, not because I'm picking on him, but because he is the least cringy. Yeah, I know.
The first principle we'll look at is the foundational principle of all logic and reason.
I know, I'm sorry.
The principle of non-contradiction. Something cannot be A and not A at the same time. Also, if something is A, then it cannot be B if A and B are mutually exclusive. It may be possible for something that is A to later turn into B, but once it does, it cannot be A anymore.
That's correct.
Directly from this we get...
Pause it for a second?
Yeah.
Because this is actually a mistake that I made, and it wasn't until like after I made the video, like a week later, I was going through it again. I was like, oh wait a minute, he made a mistake. Okay. So Aristotle is credited with the law of non-contradiction, and the way he's presenting it here is something can't be both A and not A at the same time, which it can. What Aristotle is saying, when he proposed it, he said, or not Aristotle, Socrates. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's Socratic. What Socrates says is something can't be A and not A at the same time in the same sense. So we can take, for an example, like O.J. Simpson. Like, we're all pretty sure that, he murdered Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson. We're pretty sure that he did that. But he was found to be innocent by a court of law. So in the sense of the law, he's innocent. In the sense of did he actually do it or not, he's guilty. So he can actually be A and not A at the same time, just not in the same sense. And that's a really important part that he left out.
But how does that apply to this discussion? Because
it gets into it. It would get into it if I realized that that's what he said at the time. I would like, I'm
glad I have you here.
Argument, so
cool. Yeah. So you're going to make your argument stronger today as well. Good.
Yeah.
The consistency A to later turn into B, but once it does, it cannot be A anymore.
That's correct.
Directly from this we get the consistency principle. In logic, consistency means that you don't contain any contradictions. So long as the principle of non-contradiction holds, the consistency principle does as well. While there are proofs of consistency, for purposes of this video, we'll just look at falsifiability. If we can find inconsistency in a posit, then the posit must be rejected. So if A and B are mutually exclusive and a true dichotomy, then falsifying A is all that you have to do to support B and vice versa.
Well, that is correct, but his example is poor, so I omitted it just to alleviate confusion.
It's the consistency principle that leads us to establish burden of proof. The burden of proof is on the active side, not the passive side.
12 Dozen would like to know if you're a Satanist.
Yes.
No, really?
Yes.
I can never tell if you're trolling. So I guess we'll
No,
never know.
I'm serious. I'm dead serious.
Why? What? What? Hold on. Stop everything.
Yeah, we can talk about this. We can take a little break from this. I have my notes written down, so I'm not going to forget. So I was really interested in Max Stirner for a while. I was introduced to it by maybe someone you've heard of by the name of Brian Sovereign and James Weeks. They were really like pushing me, like, you got to check this book out. I think you might like it because some of the things you say about the non-aggression principle and stuff. I think you might like it. And so I really did like it, but there was something just kind of nagging me, and it mostly had to do with how Stirner kind of talked about spooks and phantasms, which we're going to get into later. But the idea of that, that these ideas, these abstract ideas that don't actually exist in the physical reality, that there's things that people hold to be true that they would hold over their own life. Like they would be willing to die for it, be it religion, be it, kind of like political ideologies, nationalism, people go to war for their country or their queen or whatever.
Their children, their families. Yeah.
Right. And so those things were bad and people should just get over them. And I was like, I don't think you can get over those. I think there's an innate thing in human beings that, that they want symbols and traditions and rights and stuff like that. And so everybody was like, you should check out, someone else who was talking to me at the time because I was interested in those ideas, which I probably won't mention him by name. But he was like, maybe you should check this out. Like, the Book of Satan, the Church of Satan. I was like, what is this? It's just edgy Ayn Rand shit. Like, who cares? And he's like, no. I think you might be interested in it. I don't know. I was like,
is it edgy Ayn Rand shit? The Book of Satan is edgy Ayn Rand shit?
It's okay. So there's influence from Rand. There's also influences from someone who was influenced by Stirner, which is Ragnar Redbeard. And they kind of omitted all the terrible shit that Ragnar Redbeard said and just kept all the good things. Okay. And the point of it was like, okay, yeah, like, these are things that people believe and they think that they're all true and everything. But the reason why they believe that is because there's an innate thing that's in people that want to believe in these higher things. So why believe in those things that'll get you killed when you can believe in something that I just made up here as a carny in San Francisco, and you just believe in all this stuff, and that I made it up, and that it's completely, it's just something that I made up, and that'll be your placeholder. That's something that you can hold as your traditions and rights. And I was like, that's brilliant, because that was really what I was kind of feeling kind of vacant from egoism. And I was like, all right, I can dig through this. So there's a lot of things that like Anton was for that I'm not a big fan of. Like he was a big fan of intellectual property. He was very, very against like the occult and stuff, which I don't participate in the occult, but I think it's kind of interesting. And I was like, yeah, I'll just kind of go my independent way. I never became a member of the Church of Satan. Very much opposed to the Satanic Temple, which I just watched a documentary about, it was just terrible. Just a bunch of SJWs pretending to be Satanists.
I know almost nothing about anything you're talking about, so okay. I'll just say, okay. Do you worship Beelzebub is the only like remaining question. Like when somebody says I'm a Satanist, that's kind of what I get from it. Is like they're religious towards Satan.
Okay, so Satanism was codified by Anton LaVey in 1966.
Remember, I'm raised in southern United States. I've been in Texas, so Satanist is a pretty dirty word. Can you tell me what that means?
So so that didn't exist before then. All it was used was a pejorative for people that they thought were devil worshippers and stuff. Satanists don't believe in any kind of anthropomorphic demon that lives underground. They don't believe in God, and they think that it would be insane for anyone to say, here's a story about God and heaven, and we're and then there's like these people who they're going to win this war against. We're going to side with the loser. That would be insane. So the idea is to kind of use the stories that were talked about in the Bible and kind of be like, yeah, we kind of identify with a lot of the things that Satan talks about. Where he tries to talk Abraham out of murdering his son in the name of God, and say like, hey, it's not a bad idea. Like, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that kind of idea? So we're kind of using him as a symbol or a metaphor for the individual, for the adversarial kind of position against a lot of these kind of spooky ideas, right? Yeah.
So I would not call that a Satanist, but that's used the definition that I've been raised with. So that just seems more like an egoist, kind of almost, Randian, almost selfish. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yes. I need to read some things.
I have a lot of issues with Rand. A lot of issues with Rand, and more than just her statism and stuff like that. There's just a lot of issues with that. And a lot of her weird behavior towards the end of her life, where she was like had a whole bunch of cats and she wouldn't want to get them fixed because she wanted them to have that pleasure. And it's just what is happening with this lady? But not to say that some of the things she said were okay. So
yeah. I mean, there are no sacred cows here. So
yep.
Travis Hallman says objective reality equals a 6 can be perceived as a 9. That's one of those things that people like to say when they try and make the argument that our senses preclude us from being able to actually know anything. Like our senses have the capacity for accuracy. It doesn't mean that they even usually function with accuracy. It just means that they have, because we're digressing now, but I would just say that, like there's photon receptors in your eye, the rods and cones, and when a photon hits them, they're stimulated. Those extra electrical impulses hit your brain. Like all that is deterministic and not up for perception. It's how your brain interprets those signals that enter it. Sometimes it's stimulated in a way that conforms with reality. Sometimes you're hallucinating. Sure. But, that's why we have things like the scientific method, that we don't rely unilaterally on our perceptions of the universe to find truth. But you have to also understand, like you have to agree that even most of the time, our senses have the capacity for some kind of accuracy and some kind of objectivity. Otherwise, you would not be watching this YouTube video and the shit coming out of my mouth would be gibberish and we would just be unable to communicate most of the time.
Yeah, so we don't know everything with 100% certainty unless they're kind of explaining definitional terms, right? So we can say that all bachelors are unmarried, and we know that that's completely true because by definition, if they're married, they're not a bachelor,
right?
But there's things that we can know with certainty, but like relative certainty, but not 100% true. And I give some examples of this because this is kind of I guess this is a nice kind of segue back into the video, where he talks about like you can't prove a negative type of attitude towards this, where he says you can't, or the burden of proof is always on the active side. And we'll get into that, I guess.
Okay. I'm just going through the comments. There's quite a backlog. We're very active here. So guys, if I miss a comment, there's that super chat thing if you want to make sure I see something, but I'm going to keep going with the video here for a little while. I know I'm missing some good stuff in here, though. All right.
Side. There are a lot of things you're not doing right now. Maybe you're not collecting stamps at the moment. You're not walking on the moon. You're not inventing the hoverboard. You're not annexing the Sudetenland. There's an infinity of things you're not doing at the time. Imagine if someone said you had to justify every single one of them. There's no way you could do it. It would be inconsistent for someone to insist that you had to justify one or some of the things you're not doing, since you can't possibly justify them all. The only principle consistent with the consistency principle is that if you're not doing something, you don't have to justify it to anybody. The burden of proof is never on the passive side. Which means that the burden of proof must be on the active side when the active side conflicts with a passive side.
This is where it gets dicey. The examples given are pretty lopsided for his view on this principle, but then again, it is his video. For starters, sure, you don't have to justify not collecting stamps or walking on the moon. However, I think Shane and most libertarians would have ethical objections for not caring for your young offspring who are in your custody, not convincing your suicidal friend not to squeeze the trigger, not defending your friend from bogus.
So are you listing these things off as things that would be acceptable under the non-aggression principle, or
so far, according to his argument? And I do think you can make the case that to force someone against their will to feed their kid would be a violation of the non-aggression principle. Yeah, axiomatically applied. Yeah.
But it's positive action to take on a positive obligation of caring for a kid. So I break with some philosophers and libertarians on this issue that like once you have a kid, you can just like leave it to starve. Well, no, obviously you've When you take
obviously,
positive
I disagree
action,
with that,
you disagree
Yeah.
with what? Me or them?
I disagree. No, I disagree with the claim that you can that it's okay to let your kids starve. That's okay. I don't agree with that at all. Obviously, I mean, I'm also
me either.
anti-spanking, but yeah,
But I also
hope so. I'm your father.
but
I'm sure you are.
But aren't you saying that it's allowable under the NAP? Because that we do agree if you are.
Yeah.
I mean, we do disagree if
Yeah.
that's what you think.
Yes. So where do we disagree?
Well, so it's a positive obligation taken on by positive action. Like when you create
Okay.
a child, you take on a positive obligation. You take on custodianship, let's say. You take on possession of somebody else's property, so you have an obligation to care for that property until you can return it to them. I agree that there are no positive obligations unless you go out of your way in the world to acquire them. Like if you do something, if you sign a contract, you take on a positive obligation as outlined in the contract. Or, at very least, you take on whatever the repercussions outlined, are for not doing what you contracted yourself to do. Does that make sense? What do you think?
Yeah. So I'm kind of going to what Rothbard was talking about, because he wrote a book called Ethics of Liberty, and he talks about some of the examples of things that are allowed under the NAP. And one of the things he talks about in the book is of course we would look down on these people and tell them they're awful people, but it should not be a violation of the law to neglect your children and allow them to starve.
Yeah, I have a hard break with that. I not only do I disagree with that, I disagree that I think that's a violation of the NAP for sure.
Yeah, and his reasoning is kind of like, look, I mean, like the child didn't agree to this relationship at all. They know there's libertarians who disagree with it as well, and that's fine. However, as it was posited, as we're talking about kind of like the Rothbardian kind of view of the non-aggression principle, that's a fair point to bring up.
Sure. Okay. I'm just stating for the audience my position that I disagree that that isn't a violation of the NAP.
Charges.
What were the other things you said? Let me rewind.
Stamps or walk. It is his video. For starters, sure, you don't have to
This is great conversation. Thanks for being on.
justify not
no
collecting
problem.
stamps or walking on the moon. However, I think Shane and most libertarians would have ethical objections for not caring for your young offspring who are in your custody, not convincing your suicidal friend not to squeeze the trigger.
Convincing or forcibly preventing? I think we'll get to that later in the video, actually. That's one of your examples at the end.
So that's kind of a joke, because it's kind of like an inside joke with a lot of people, because Shane did a video where he was talking about some stupid things that anti-gun people say, and one of the things he mentioned was that they say pull the trigger, and he was like, actually it's squeeze the trigger. But later, a couple times in the video, he talks about people pulling the trigger, and it's like, guy.
If you're going to correct somebody on clip versus magazine, make sure you use magazine going forward. Yeah.
So it was just kind of like a little joke for the initiated. Yeah. So squeeze the trigger.
Travis says, Patrick, do parents have a positive obligation to prohibit a child from doing something immoral such as porn under the NAP? Porn is immoral? Oh, you mean from like performing in porn?
Them seeing it or them performing in it?
My brain did not first jump to child porn.
Would you think it's immoral would you think it was immoral to let your young children see it either? Not just participate in it?
Like porn in general? So I am non-standard in my usage of the term immoral. Okay. I link moral and I think moral, what is moral, what is good is always subjective. Like I don't think, at least I haven't been I haven't found some kind of objective definition for the good yet. I think the good, the degree of good it could be anywhere from neutral to Christ-like, let's say, and that's just kind of a subjective opinion based on your values. But I think if we take the non-aggression principle, I think we can use that to define what is objectively evil. Like I think if we can attach the word evil to the non-aggression principle, that finally, for the first time in the history of the species, we have an objective definition for evil rather than one that is a political or religious or, defined by whatever charlatan is in prominence at the time. Like the Catholic Church will define evil one way, and, the Roman emperor will define it another way, and the Democrats will, define evil the other way. But if we can take the non-aggression principle as an objective definition, we can attach it to evil. and use sort of the power of evil to an objective equation to give us ethics. And so that's how I define it. Good is sort of subjective. Evil can be defined by the NAP.
So you're taking kind of like a deontological, ethical position, not so much of a moral. Okay.
Said another way, if something is evil, it means you can attack them over it. Like that's just meaning the non-aggression principle has been violated, which means you can act in self-defense or act in force to prevent further non-aggression or further aggression or whatever.
Okay.
Where was I going with that? Patrick, do parents have a positive obligation to... the porn thing. So, I mean, that's a whole discussion on parenting and the effects. Like, performing in child porn? That sounds pretty goddamn damaging to a child. So, I think it would be... I mean, I'll have to examine the ethics of that, but I'm pretty fucking sure.
Or even viewing it. I mean, allowing a 6-year-old kid to see some of the stuff that's on... Pornhub or something like that. I mean, that would be kind of gross.
Except the Disenthrall.
I mean, if a parent, they could watch that. That's fine.
Yeah, we're on Pornhub.
except when phobia talks.
Yes. Phobia is going to get us kicked off of every platform.
Including Pornhub.
Even we've been censored 4 times as often on Pornhub than we have on YouTube, by the way. Like they watch carefully. Like if I do a video commenting on news about a rape, boom, like they delete that. They delete it instantly. They don't tolerate that. And that's fine. It's their platform. Where are we? Moral does not equal ethical. See, these distinctions are way too subjective. Everyone has pulled them in 500 different directions. I like to say that ethics is the study of morality. Like if you apply some kind of scientific method to morality, that's what I call ethics. So there is a case to be made that they can be used interchangeably, especially in kind of like everyday parlance. That's fine, but technically there is a difference. But the technicality of it, like you could still use it interchangeably in some instances. So I mean, he's right, but it's really but it's kind of like one of those actually moments. So. Actually. Right. We're 12 minutes in. Let's continue. Here we go.
Not defending your friend from bogus charges. In Shane's case in particular, not vaccinating your kids. By the way, people, please vaccinate your fucking kids. There's lots of ethical issues.
Would you like to say anything about vaccinations?
Vaccines don't cause autism. Vaccines don't cause autisms. I mean, look, there's injuries that happen with any sort of medication that happens. They're extremely rare. Look, and if you don't want to force if you don't want to be forced, like I have no problem with people not wanting to vaccinate their kids, but they need to do it over there. I want to live in an area where, like, in order for you to participate in our little covenant community or wherever I'm going to be live, my apartment complex, take my kids to school, which I don't have kids. I don't want kids. But if I had kids or nephews, there we go. My nephews, I don't want them anywhere near kids that are unvaccinated because of herd immunity and stuff like that. But I'm not going to force anyone to do that stuff. But at the same time, it's like you got to weigh your options. Do we want another polio scare, another polio outbreak that's going to kill lots and lots of kids? Or are we going to take a little bit of risks and, put them up there? And science is kind of advancing, and we can kind of detect. We're starting to be able to detect like what kind of children are going to be affected negatively by these vaccines. Maybe if there's a medical exception for them, by all means, they should take it. Herd immunity will cover most of those.
This is one of those topics like abortion that can like grab an episode and just take it over for 4 hours. Yeah. So the only thing I'll say is, go ahead.
Yeah, but I just want to make this clear because I know there was some people that were confused by this. Shane is very pro-vax, very pro-vax. He's done a lot of great videos about vaccines, and I highly recommend all of them.
Oh, you made it sound like he was against it in this video.
Yeah. So, like, in retrospect, after making this video, like, a lot of people pointed out, like, hey, it kind of sounds like he's anti-vax. I was like, no. I was saying that he would agree that it would be wrong for you not to vaccinate your children. That's what I was saying in the video. He's done a lot of great videos about vaccinations, and I highly recommend them.
Okay, well, just to kind of sidestep
I just wanted to make that clear.
I appreciate you correcting it. Yeah, just to sort of sidestep this be taking over the episode, I'll just say that we agree on not forcing them. I would also agree that for the most part they are beneficial. They certainly have risks, which you said when you brought it up. So we might not disagree terribly much on them. But
I mean, I'm wearing my medical gi right now, and I'll tell you right now, there's lots of those flu vaccines that come around, and the whole hospital will be like, no, we're not passing these out. These ones, this round is terrible.
Really? Well,
Yeah.
how do they determine it's terrible?
Because they usually make the cocktail of all the various strains that they think are going to be affecting the area at that particular time. And they do that like months and months in advance. And then sometimes the flu virus hits and they were completely wrong.
Okay.
Completely wrong. And it's kind of like, all right, do we risk, all the potential problems that are going to come with this and not receive any of the rewards? No. So there's lots of times where I'll come to work and they're like, we're giving flu shots, but you don't have to take it if you don't want to. And we're advising the patients that they can refuse if they want because it's worthless. So we're like,
interesting.
all right, fine, I won't take it.
So it's almost like there's a little bit of oversight. Like it's not just them pushing.
Yeah.
Like part of the narrative that I disagree with is that they're just like immorally, blindly pushing vaccinations on the public. You just gave a counterexample to that. But anyway,
and especially if they have a history of. If they have a history, like especially if the patient has a history of reacting negatively to flu vaccines, and they're like, no, then don't do it then.
And that's part of the parent's responsibility. Like you got to watch your kid and not just like, let them get a vaccination and ignore symptoms, and then next week, next month, give them the next set of vaccinations. You got to watch this stuff because bodies react differently to this stuff, and it can be extremely dangerous and extremely damaging. So anyway, wow, we're all over the
Sherry's
place.
here.
Hey, Sherry, how you doing? Okay.
Issues with the passive and active sides of actions. By the way, there's lots of things that you would do that would be unreasonable to justify. Imagine having to justify breathing, eating, walking, talking, using a computer, every input you feed into it, every cough, every clearing of the throat, every sip of your Monster. By the way,
well, he said, only when in Killian's, you just sipped Monster, didn't you? Do you know I've never tasted Monster? I don't even know what it tastes like.
It's delicious. No, this is. I'm drinking Diet Dr Pepper because they were out of Coke Zero.
Oh, okay.
Coke Zero gang.
He said only if somebody. Killian said only when somebody's challenging. It's not like somebody's going around challenging you using your computer. So that wasn't what Killian was talking about, right?
Okay, so Shane's Killian was. Oh, it's nice. So
hey, Steven. Thanks for the super chat. $50.
So
Jesus Christ, friend. How much do we miss? He says a bunch of us were waiting at another link. There was another link. Oh no! I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I guess when you refresh the page, it went to another video. I had to reshare the link.
Really? Oh, I'm sorry for that, guys.
Yeah,
I apologize. My bad.
That's fine. So, anyways, so what Shane was saying was, look, you can't possibly justify all of the things that you did not do because there's an infinity of things you didn't do, and it would be unreasonable for you to justify all of them. So you don't need to justify one of them. So we're going to say, okay, how does that apply to this next step where he's talking about, well, you can justify the things that you are doing. It's not just when you're challenged, because he didn't bring up being challenged on the other thing. He said, like, if you're being challenged on one thing, you don't have to challenge things on one thing because it would be impossible for you to justify all of the things, and they could, if they wanted to, ask you to justify all those things, which you can do the same thing for positive actions, right? So, I mean, we're live streaming. I need you to justify that. I know you just clicked your mouse on something. You read something. You said it out loud. I think you just sniffed right there. You need to justify all of those actions. And in the process of justifying those actions, I'm going to find more actions that you were doing in the process and ask you to justify those. And we're just going to be in an endless loop forever and ever and ever. So, I mean, if it's equally impossible to justify all the things that you can't do, you can also make the same claim that you can't justify all the things that you are doing, even right now, let alone all the things you've done in the past.
Okay. Don't disagree. I do want to listen to it again, though, just to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Issues with the...
Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay, hold on.
All example is poor, so I omitted it just to alleviate confusion.
It's the consistency principle that leads us to establish burden of proof. The burden of proof is on the active side, not the passive side. There are a lot of things you're not doing right now. Maybe you're not collecting stamps at the moment. You're not walking on the moon. You're not inventing the hoverboard. You're not annexing the Sudetenland. There's an infinity of things you're not doing at the time. Imagine if someone said you had to justify every single one of them. There's no way you could do it. It would be inconsistent for someone to insist that you had to justify one or some of the things you're not doing, since you can't possibly justify them all. The only principle consistent
is a bad
with the
justification
consistency
for-
principle is that if you're not
number 3.
doing something, you don't have to justify it to anybody. The burden of proof is never on the passive side.
I mean, this rule is a valid rule. I think he just maybe used a bad example to show it, right? Do you disagree with number 3?
So there's this. So basically, what he's arguing is, the burden of proof is on the active side. This is kind of another way of explaining a common trope that was in kind of skeptic circles. And I'm not talking about skeptic in terms of Sargon of Akkad or those people. I'm talking about the original skeptics like James Randi, the bad astronomer, Penn Teller, like those people.
Yep.
And their claim was not all of them. A lot of them have corrected the record on this, but a lot of them were saying that you can't prove a negative, right? Like, I can't prove that Bigfoot doesn't exist. That's up to you to prove to me that Bigfoot exists. All I can do is say there's no evidence for it. You need to prove it. However, this is like, I mean, it's logically false. I mean, there's I just had to pull up the Latin for it. Modus talens. Oh, here it is. Modus talens, which is an actual logical argument. It's a valid logical argument, and you can actually put good inputs into those things to make it a sound argument as well. To say, like, if A is true, then B is true. A is not true, therefore B is also, or A is also not true, or therefore A is not true. So P equals P. If P, then Q. Neg Q, therefore P. Neg P. So you can actually prove an argument logically and reasonably. So we can say, like, let's say, if
I guess give me an example, because I'm seeing a problem with that. Like, you would have to assume to prove a negative, you would have to assume other positive things to get there. But like, give me an example.
So we can say, like, if I said that Scotch. Scotch exists, and you go like, no, Scotch doesn't exist. What are you talking about? and I go, well, Scotch doesn't exist because there's no such place as Scotland. If Scotch exists, there would be a place called Scotland. There's no place called Scotland, therefore Scotland doesn't exist. Now we know that Scotland exists, right? We can say like, okay, no, that's actually false, because look, I mean, I got a bottle of Highland Park right here. Obviously, Scotch exists, but we can also make the same claim to, like, Abu Dhabi whiskey doesn't exist, and if there was an Abu Dhabi whiskey, there would be a place called Abu Dhabi. But or is Abu Dhabi? Where was Aladdin at? I forget where that country was. That fake country. No, Abu Dhabi is a real place. What was it? Agrabah. There we go. Agrabah. So Abergaben whiskey, right? If we can prove that there's no place called Agrabah, then we can prove that there's no such thing as Agrabagan whiskey. Well, there's no such place. Therefore, there is no Agrabagan whiskey, right?
I mean, you have to. The positive assumptions that you have to make before you can prove that doesn't exist is that
right. But you would have to make those connections. Yeah, that's where reason comes in. But logically, you can prove a negative, and also you can also just double negate things. So I can say, like, well, you can't prove that existence doesn't exist. Well, I can prove that non-existence doesn't exist by proving that it does exist. So I want to save negative.
I want to save it because I think you bring some of these examples up, like Loch Ness and stuff, in the video. So
yeah.
Let's hit play and then we'll come back around.
Which means that the burden of proof must be on the active side when the active side conflicts with a passive side.
This is where it gets dicey. The examples given are pretty lopsided for his view on this principle, but then again, it is his video. For starters, sure, you don't have to justify not collecting stamps or walking on the moon. However, I think Shane and most libertarians would have ethical objections for not caring for your young offspring, who are in your defending your friends. By the way, people, please vaccinate active sides of actions. By the way, there's lots of things that you would do that would be unreasonable to justify. Imagine having to justify breathing, eating, walking, talking, using a computer, every input you feed into it, every cough, every clearing of the throat, every sip of your Monster. By the way,
so like he was also saying that, like, this proposition of not having to prove the negative, or the obligations on the active side, is in the context of a debate or a conflict over something. Like, it's not just like in everyday life. But I still agree that maybe his example wasn't good. Okay.
Well, yeah, you can still prove a negative, and you can always place a burden of proof on the negative side. And I get it goes on to give examples of negative actions, non-actions that a lot of us would object to.
Okay.
Okay.
Doom was a great game. One
It was
can
a
make
great
a
game.
reasonable case that it would
was
be
a great game.
impossible to justify them all, as you would do more of these actions in the process of justifying them than you could justify them. Also, this leaches into the not being able to.
You know, I just want to say real quick, I just had a thing pop into my head. Like, if somebody called me out and asked me to come on their show to sit there and, like, pick apart a video that I made, that's not an easy fucking thing to do. And so I want to, like, at least recognize you for having the balls to do what you're doing. Like, I appreciate that. Like, just coming on the show, like, putting your ass where your mouth is. That's really cool. Most people wouldn't do. Most people wouldn't even take time to make these videos, but even less would come on to defend them and have their shit scrutinized. I really admire that. So I just want to say that.
I honestly, like, I've talked about this before. I want to be proven wrong about the NAP. That would nothing make it easier to just have an objective, ethical standard that we can point to and go, this is all we need. This is it. This is the objective ethics. It's indisputable. We don't even have to argue about it. But I just don't think we're there yet. That's just that simple.
Well, all right. Well, hopefully we'll get
So
there.
I want to be proven wrong. I genuinely do.
All right.
I always want to be proven wrong. I mean,
which is
that's why I
false.
jumped ideologies. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah.
For example, I can indeed prove beyond a reasonable doubt that I never raped Helen Keller. Why? Because we never lived at the same time. I can also prove that the law.
Well, you'd also have to make that. No. To make that claim that you never raped Helen Keller or never were raped by. I didn't catch which way the rape went, but either way,
The rape went that way.
you'd have to prove other negatives first, like that time travel never gets invented, or that she didn't clone herself or find a way to extend her life. Like, you have to prove other things before you can prove that negative. So
True.
I'm not sure that you can make
However,
that claim that you can prove that negative.
Right.
Like, you can't prove that negative is what I'm saying.
Right. We can prove with relative certainty that I didn't rape Helen Keller just by the sheer fact that I don't exist in a world where time travel doesn't exist. This is proof enough for most people would go, that's reasonably fine. Now, when we start introducing things like dimensional portals, or we're talking about time travel and stuff like that, then we can go, okay, then we don't really know, because for all we know, Jim could have a time travel machine, when he's 80 years old, and he could have gone back in time and done this, but I still haven't done it yet. Well, we know with relative certainty that it's absolutely true. We're not going to know in the same sense as, I think
what I'm trying to say is
finding a buried bachelor, right?
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I think what I'm trying to say is like the only time you can prove a negative is using like the first principles, like non-contradiction and like outside of that, like you cannot prove that you didn't rape Helen Keller, like because or she didn't rape you. I forget which way it went, but like you have to prove all these other things that you can't prove to get there. Like you can never fully prove it. Just like scientists use the scientific method to prove the law of gravity. Well, it's still the theory of gravity, because it's not something that you can't. That's a bad example, but there's
gravity is really confusing, and we don't really know much about it other than how it affects things, and that's about it. Like, we don't know where it comes from. We don't know. Theory of gravity is always changing.
And Sherry
We
Voluntary,
really don't know that much.
yeah, Sherry Voluntary just called me out really hard, and I can't believe I said the words "put your ass where your mouth is." I'm glad that you took that how I meant it instead of the words. Sherry says, "I love that you put your ass where your mouth is." Patrick Smith, lol.
I like you, Patrick, but let's go on a few dates first, then we'll.
Oh God, that is not what I meant. Oh man, blushing for the rest of the show now. Good Lord. All right. Well, okay, I'm hitting play.
So anyways, what we were saying was we can prove things with relative certainty, things that most people would look at and go, okay, that's reasonable enough evidence to show that never happened. Like, we know a lot of things, like, for instance, I know Kavanaugh is back in the news again, so I'm not really sure what the new allegations are, so I'm not going to comment on those. But we do know with relative certainty that the initial allegations that were leveled against him were most likely untrue. I mean, sure, there could have been a dimensional portal that he popped through, where all of those things where we could prove that he was at a different place at a different time, and all of his witnesses didn't corroborate her story and all this other stuff. We can say, like, yeah, it's pretty reasonable to believe that wasn't true, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I agree.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know about the new claims. I'm not making any stance on the new claims. I just want to be 100% certain, just in case they actually are true or something. I don't know. But we know that initially, we can say with reasonable certainty that his proof that he wasn't there and he didn't do that was reasonable enough for most people. Just as we can say that, it's reasonable for you to believe that I didn't rape Helen Keller because I was born in 1982 and she died, in the 60s or something.
Yeah. Oh, hey,
Yeah, so-
I missed it. Stephen Mulvey donated again, another $2. Thank you. Two NZs. I don't know what an NZ is. Is that like funny money? How much is that worth?
I think it's New Zealand dollars.
I know, I'm just kidding. And Eric Haley, thank you for the $5.
We know with relative certainty. We know with relative certainty that I didn't do anything to Helen Keller, but New Zealand and sheep, question mark. Yeah, I'm just kidding. I love New Zealand.
a big cottony question mark. Eric Haley
I hang out
donated
with a lot of
$5.
Australians, I'm sorry.
Is it against the nap for my barbecue smoke to go into my vegan neighbor's backyard? Also, thank you for doing this. You're welcome, sir. You were one of the first to request that I do this.
Unless they said you can. Unless they said you can. We'll get into that. That's a lot later in the video.
I can't wait till we get into it. I would say it depends on who homesteaded the property first. That would be a Blockian answer, but we'll get to it. I keep clicking the button. All right, here we go.
Ness monster can't exist by proving that the size of the lake can't produce enough food for such a large creature, and by pointing out that radar scans show no creature at the bottom of the water.
Now, going from nothing more than these first principles, let's see how this works in the libertarian statist debate. Force is active. Ergo, those who want to use force have the burden of proof. Those who do not have no such burden at all. There really is no way around this. If someone's just sitting there not doing anything, the burden is on you to justify any action taken against him, like, say, taking some of his money. And you can't worm your way out of this just by calling yourself a government. That is a blatant violation of the consistency principle. You can't have different rules for government than you do for the rest of us.
Again, there's passive and active sides to behaviors that probably need justification or probably should not.
So I know you statists are now chomping at the...
What did you mean by that?
Did we skip? I think we skipped. I don't know, or maybe I just didn't bring it up yet. I don't remember. So I was making the claim that I said this earlier, and I was like, we'll get to it eventually. Apparently, we didn't. So there's negative actions, the things that people don't do that we would find abhorrent, right? Like, for instance, if we're walking down the street and we see like a young girl getting raped, and we just keep walking by, a lot of us would, like, if you heard that I did something like that, or that if I showed up at a friend's house who was talking about he was going to commit suicide, and I was just going like, and just didn't do anything and just let him commit suicide in front of me. I think most people would go, what you did, Jim, is truly evil. You should have said something. You should have done something. I think most people's intuitions would be that. And I definitely would get outcast from society, and I would definitely get a lot of scrutiny from people in the libertarian community, and rightly so.
Would you claim that it's a NAP violation to not do anything in that situation?
No, that's what I'm saying, is that it's not a NAP violation to not do anything. Like, so if I see something terrible that's happening and I could single-handedly stop it, by a simple action, even if it didn't take any like just talking to my friend, like, no, dude, like, you're my friend, like, I want you around, like, don't do that. Or to even break the NAP and take the gun from him, which I would do. So if I had a friend who was threatening to commit suicide and he had a gun, I would wrestle him from the gun, try to talk him out of it.
Yeah. Again, I sort of fight for, and I realize that I'm making a new definition of evil, like nobody's ever done that before. But if we take the NAP as evil in that situation, I wouldn't call it evil because I wouldn't be able to attack you for not doing something to save the person. I would not be right in attacking you for not doing something. So I wouldn't, because that's not a NAP violation. And I think we agreed on that. Now, is that abhorrent fucking behavior that, like you said, like you would rightfully probably be ostracized from any civilized society over not doing that stuff? Would I certainly not be your friend anymore? Would I not do business with you ever again? No, I wouldn't. We would disassociate over behavior like that. However,
But would you say that it's ethical? Would that be ethical behavior? I mean, you're saying that it's terrible behavior. Is it ethical?
So, like, if I'm defining evil as a NAP violation, then that's my line. Because anything outside of that is just subjective opinion. Like, who gives a shit if I think it's unethical personally? Patrick thinks it's personally unethical. Like, what weight does that really carry? Anybody can, by that logic, call anything unethical. Like, what matters is what I'm justified in using force over. Like,
okay,
that,
but would you demand that someone justify their actions if they did that? Like, if you found out that I do that and we're doing a live stream right now, let's just theoretically say that happened, right? Or
that what happened? That you didn't help somebody?
That I saw a girl getting raped and I could have stopped it. You know, I had a cell phone. I could have called, you know, my DSO or excuse me, DSO, my PSA or DRO, whatever you want to call it, and I could have made that phone call and stopped it right there. Mm-hmm. And I didn't do anything. I was just like, nah, I want to do other things. I want to go home and play Mario Maker. And you found out about that, you'd be demanding a justification from me. You'd be like, why did you do this? This is terrible. You would be demanding an explanation.
But it would be a demand not backed by force. It would just be like a sociological demand, you know, based on our relationship. Like, it wouldn't be an ethical demand, like, I'm going to, you know, attack you if you don't answer me kind of demand.
No.
Like, which I don't think it applies to what Killian's saying here, because it's not like I'm making a forceful demand on you.
I don't think he was talking about force, and then when he's talking about justifying, because he's someone saying, like, do you want you to justify you walking on the moon?
Well, okay, well, I guess I'll talk about what I mean then. Like, I'm not trying to defend every word that Killian says here. I'm just trying to have a conversation with you to find the actual truth. And so I'm giving you what I think to challenge you. So, like, that is my position. Like, I define evil as a NAP violation because that is an objective barometer of when somebody can attack somebody else, when somebody can use force on somebody else. Everything else is subjective opinion. That's not to say that subjective opinion is powerless or flimsy or worthless. It's extremely visceral and powerful, and can even, in certain circumstances, if somebody gets ostracized enough, they can die because of subjective opinion. So I'm not like saying, oh, fuck it, you didn't help somebody. Like, it's just my opinion that I didn't like that. It's kind of go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I'm agreeing with you. Like, I would agree, because I said at the start of this video, and we said at the start of the stream, that, you know, I agree with the non-aggression principle, and, like, in spirit, for the most part, I agree with it. There's just some technical nuances that I have some issues with, and a lot of the argumentations to try to prove that it's an objective ethic. That's where I'm starting to go, I don't know about that. I think it's a good rule of thumb.
Well, like,
why
don't we just talk about that then?
I think there's other things that people can do, which I would classify as either immoral or unethical, that would not break the non-aggression principle, and vice versa. Things that would break the non-aggression principle if held axiomatically, or as most people would say, autistically. That would prove.
What do you mean? So what do you mean when you say objective? Like, when you say you don't think the NAP is objective ethics,
universal,
what do you mean by that?
So when people talk about this, they're talking about that it's a universal objective ethic.
What do you mean by universal?
That it applies to all.
Okay, go ahead.
That it applies to all people at all times, no matter and in all places, and all, you know. So if you're on the moon,
what do you mean by applies?
So these are the ethics that you ought to follow.
Okay.
And if you violate those ethics, then you are immoral, unethical, whatever you want to use. So it doesn't matter if it's today, right here in my apartment, or if it's 1,000 years ago with, you know, Joe Bob on the moon. It doesn't matter if it's some Klingon, I don't know, space monster thing that lives in, you know, sector 295828 planet Z or something. Like, it's an ethic that applies universally and everywhere in the universe.
And twice on Sundays.
That's the issue that I have. And twice on Sundays, right? Of course. Well, no, twice on Sundays, that would make it not universal. Because that would be an exception to the universal rule. Yeah.
The way I say it is just slightly different. So let me see if this makes any difference to you. I say it's universalizable, like, meaning it's possible to be used in all times and places with all people at the same time. I just say that it is possible. Like, it is one of the few rules that can be used by everyone at all times in all places. It doesn't mean that it is the only rule, and it doesn't mean that it is used in all times and places. It just means that it is a rule, one of the few, if not only rules that people have discovered that can be used at all times and all places by all people.
Okay, so you can have multiple universal truths. You can have multiple universal ethics, right? You can have like two ethics. You can say
yes.
like there's a non-aggression principle, and then there's also, you know, exploitation theory by Marx. They're both true universally, right? That's entirely possible. Sure, those conflict, but bear with me here. So yeah,
the second one's self-contradictory, so that wouldn't be valid.
Right, right.
Yeah,
of course.
Well,
but it was
I'm sorry to interrupt you. That was kind of my point, though. Like, what other ones are there that have been found to not be self-contradictory that are also universalizable? It's kind of a special thing in that way, right?
Well, we may not know yet, but it could exist. I mean, theoretically, there could be a universal ethical system, right? I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that this is not one of them.
You're saying that the nap is not universalizable.
Well, yeah, I'll get into that later. But let's just say that your conception of the non-aggression principle and the way it applies is what the non-aggression principle is, which I disagree with, which we'll get into. Even still, I don't think that it's you could apply it universally, but it would not be a universal ethic.
What does universal ethic mean? Held by everyone? Like, yeah, that'll never happen. No, I don't disagree with you.
No, it would be a universal ethic that would apply to all times, to all spaces, and that everybody has to apply to it, or objectively they're unethical or immoral.
Well, it couldn't apply itself to everyone. It's a concept. It can't apply itself to anything. Like you said earlier, it's like a spook, right? It's an objective equation that can be applied by one person to all times and situations and interactions.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll take that, but it wouldn't be a universal ethic.
I guess I keep asking. I'm not trolling you when I ask you for your definition, but what do you mean by universal ethic?
It's fine.
Because like it's fine. So this is where the debate is in these definitions. So like, when you say it's not a universal ethic, what does that mean?
Okay, so Kant kind of, I think he was the first one, because I know Ayn Rand used to go hard in the paint against Kant because he thought, fun trivia fact, Kant is the worst person in the universe, according to Ayn Rand, even more than Stalin, even more than Hitler. It was Kant. And the reason why is because he came up with the idea of universality, that, you know, that these are rules that everybody has to apply to. And it doesn't matter if you're an alien in another universe, or not another universe, it'd be in this universe, or an alien in this universe somewhere out in the galaxy, or it's here, right now at this time. It applies to all people, and it's objective, and there's no disagreeing with it. Well, you can disagree with it, but I mean, it's still true. You wouldn't have a valid objective or a valid and sound reason to object to it. It's completely true. And he had like these rules called the categorical imperatives, which are like these are ought statements that you should not follow, or that you should follow. Like, don't murder anyone, don't steal from anyone, don't lie to anyone. And it doesn't matter what the reason is for it, or the consequentialist reasons that you were given to justify this. Doesn't matter. If a Nazi shows up at your door and asking you if you have Jews in your attic, and you got Helen Keller up there, you have to not lie to him. That would be like Kant's kind of view on things. So the universality kind of thing kind of crept into ethics, and a lot of people have tried to jump onto this thing, and it's crept in, you know, Hoppe, and you have UPB, which we'll be getting into shortly in this video, which try to say that all of these kind of ethical systems are universalizable, and it doesn't matter where you are in time and space in this universe, it applies to you at all times.
Okay, I would say it is able to be applied to you. I wouldn't say it's applicable. Like, again, it's a concept. Like, the nap isn't some force in the universe that can go around applying itself on people. When you violate the non-aggression principle, an anvil doesn't fall out of the sky and land on your head. Like, so maybe this is not really a disagreement between us, where it is between me and some other people that argue for like natural rights and natural law as if they exist in some tangible fashion. And have some kind of effect, or they act in the world as concepts. That's obviously not the case.
Someone pointed something out, and it kind of reminded me because I know Prometheus. So what he's saying is there's a difference between universality, Kant's universality, and how it all applies in ethics, and the word universalizable. So for you, like, you can say that this NAP thing is universalizable for me, and I'm going to apply it to at all places at all times, no matter where I am, no matter what. That's fine. That's a fine. You can say that that's universalizable.
let me just
But
clarify.
we can't say that it's a
to make
universal
sure that,
objective or objective ethic.
okay, let me just clarify. I say it's a rule that can be universal. When I say it's universalizable, I mean by everyone at all times. It can be like if you take a rule, an obvious rule used in UPB, like let's say stealing is good. That is not universalizable because only two people in a room by themselves can't even hold that rule as good at the same time. So not only is it not universalizable to all humans in all times and places across the universe, but it's not even universalizable for two people in a room by themselves. So,
but two people can murder each other at the same time.
No, because murder requires a violation of consent. They can kill each other at the same time. Like if we define murder as a consent violation, like not you would say killing or assisted suicide instead of murder.
No. We know people who have tried to kill each other. Neither of them want to die. Neither of them want to be killed by they're not consenting. The only thing that they're trying to do is kill that other person before they kill them for whatever reason. They hate each other. They have some marital issues. I don't know, but they're both trying to kill each other. And they both can succeed in killing each other at the same time.
I'm not arguing that. I'm arguing that they both couldn't operate using the moral rule that murder is good.
Well, they can.
No,
and they would
because
die.
Two people in a room together both say, okay, murder is good. The moment the other guy's dead, they cannot continue murdering until they die themselves. But
they can both murder each other at the same time.
One person's going to die first. One person's going to be better at murdering than the other. And the act of holding that rule between those two people's brains is self-contradictory because if they both think murder is good, they both have to allow the other person to murder them. And if you allow somebody to murder you, it's not murder anymore. It's assisted suicide or it's just a consensual killing. So it's internally inconsistent in that way. There's somehow we've jumped forward to UPB. But
it's okay. It's okay. But we know of examples where people have murdered each other at the same time. People have fought to the death and they both died at the same time. Yeah.
Fine.
But if you're saying that two people can't do the same thing at the same time, like they can.
I'm saying that two people can't hold the rule in their head that murder is good. Because if both people hold the rule that murder is good and they're in a room by themselves, they're both saying murder is good. So they look at each other and be like, dude, I believe, murdering is good. And the other's like, yeah, I believe that murder is good too. Well, I guess I got to be about the process of murdering you. And they're like, well, yeah, I guess you better because murdering is good. The moment they consent to that rule, it's no longer murder is what I'm saying. That is what Molyneux was saying.
They don't want to, they're not agreeing to be murdered. They're agreeing to murder.
Oh, that's self-contradictory. You can't behave in a way that you demand other people not behave. That's self-contradictory. Like I can't punch you and say, oh, but you're not allowed to punch me back. Like that's the philosophical definition of self-defense. If I communicate to you through my fist that punching is allowed behavior, then and when you punch me back, I say, oh no, you can't punch me back. That's internally inconsistent. That's that's performative.
They're not saying that there's a rule saying that I can't be murdered, but you can. What they're saying is murder is okay, and if you murder me, that's okay. It's morally okay, but I don't want to be murdered. I want to murder you before you murder me, and they both die at the same time. There's no contradiction there.
No, the rule I said was maybe you're using a different murder rule than I am. If the rule is murder is good, like to be a good person, you have to murder. This is a positive obligation to murder. Then you want the other person to hold the same rule as you do. And if the other person holds the same rule that you do, and they begin the process of murdering you, how could you possibly resist that murder if you think that rule is a good one?
Well, you can resist things.
Why would you resist something you hold to be a moral good? Isn't that self-contradictory?
Well, you can do things that you think is morally good, but you just don't want to do. I mean, there's lots of things. I'm pretty sure, like you've helped someone, like I don't want to get your groceries, but it's the right thing to do.
No, that's not what I said. Like if you hold that murder is good, and someone is going about murdering. Even if it's you can't resist that without being performative, without a performative contradiction, without contradicting your own rule. Like, why are you resisting me doing that which you hold is the good? Like, doesn't that make you evil to resist me murdering?
But they're both simultaneously murdering each other at the same time.
Then it's not murder.
Possible. No, it would still be murder if they even
it's
was
just like
premeditated.
It's just like a cross killing. Like if they both consent to murder, it's no longer murder.
No, they're not. Okay, so there's two people that are taking place in a murder, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so the rule is it's okay to murder. There's no rules. There's no rules saying
murder is good. Like, to be good, you must murder.
There's no rules. Yeah, but there's no rule saying that you have to like being murdered. Right?
I'm saying that, like, the rule that says to be good, you must murder is not universalizable. And I was giving the example of two people in a room. Like, if they both hold that to be good, we must murder. And, you know, if you're not murdering, you're not good. Then you have to allow people to behave using the moral good that you espouse.
Okay. So what I'm saying is you have two people in a room and both of them agree that murder is good. All right. They're not saying
I don't know why you're changing the order of the words. Like, maybe you're missing it, but I'm saying like, to be good, you must murder. And you're saying, well, we both agree murder's good. Like, those are two different things.
Yeah,
like,
and both people agree that murder is good, and they're both trying to murder each other. They can achieve that goal. And
I'm saying, to be good, you must murder. Like, there's a difference between thinking murder is good, like, aesthetically, maybe, like it's your opinion that murder is good, and like holding a moral rule that says, to be good, you must murder. Like, a positive obligation to murder would be the rule that isn't universalizable.
So that rule is placed upon the person who is murdering, right?
Right. And so if
in order for that person to be good, he has to be a murderer. And
so if we're universalizing it, that means everybody has to be able to hold it at the same time. So if both people in the room, if everybody in the room holds that to be good, we must murder, then they all have to consent to each other's murder. But the moment they consent, it's no longer murder. Because if they disconsent to being murdered, then they're self-contradictory.
It's not that they're consenting to the murder or not consenting to the murder. They're trying to murder each other. They could be indifferent to the fact that they get murdered, and they can still get murdered at the same time.
I disagree that follows, because if you're holding that to be good, you must murder, that means not only do you want yourself to murder, but you want other people to murder. And so if somebody's going about the process of murdering, you're not going to resist that. You're not going to disagree with that.
No, it's okay. So there's the consent on both parties, right? So we have the person who wants to murder, that right, and then you have the person who is going to be murdered. The person can reject, like, well, not reject the concept. They can be, they can be like, I'm okay with murder. I'm okay with people murdering me morally, ethically, and I know that if I do murder, it's a good thing. And we could be in the same room and see each other and go, well, we have to murder each other in order to be good. So let's murder each other. And they could both achieve that goal. But they're not agreeing to being murdered. We're not really, well, they're,
you just said they were okay with the other person murdering them.
No, they're not okay. No. They're okay with the concept of being, of murdering. They're both still trying to kill each other.
So they're either okay with the other person murdering them, or they're not okay with the other person murdering them. If they're not okay, then that's a disanalogy, because it's not we're not universalizing it. If they are okay with the other person murdering them, it's not murder anymore.
No, it'd still be murder. They're still not agreeing. They're still consensual. They're still trying to murder each other, right? They could say that it's moral to be a murderer. There's nothing that implies that you have to agree to being murdered.
If you're holding that murder to be good, you must murder, then you're not going to act even in belief against somebody murdering. Which would mean somebody murdering you would be a logical impossibility.
No, you would have to consent to that act of murder,
which would make it not murder.
Right, but they're not saying they're not consenting or not consenting. They're too busy in the moment trying to kill the other person.
Then they're not actively holding the belief in question, and we're in a disanalogy again. So they have to like for it to be universalizable. That means they have to actively hold this belief. And if they're just kind of letting going with the flow, then that's not really an analogy, right?
Okay.
I mean, like maybe we like move on for this video. I
think we're talking over each other. Like, you have a point and I have a point, and we're just not getting through. I think that's what's happening here. I'm not sure exactly.
I suggest that we move on, and then I'll watch this later, and then if you watch it later, and maybe we can revisit. What do you just to keep moving? What do you think?
Sounds good. Yeah, let's do that. because we'll get stuck here forever.
I'm not being disingenuous. I really, I think I have a valid point.
Understand.
Okay. All right.
Getting
I know
your
you're
arguments
arguing-
already
What?
I said I know you're arguing in good faith.
Okay.
Yeah.
to just. You can't have different rules for government than you do for the rest of us.
Again, there's passive and active sides to behaviors that probably need justification or probably should not.
So I know you statists are now chomping at the bit, getting your arguments all ready to justify the forceful actions your government does. But hold on, because initiation of force cannot be defended. Person A hires person B at $7 an hour. Person C, thinking person B should be paid at least $10 an hour, wants to point a gun at person A and make him pay person B more money. Is he justified in this? Think about it. What if person A then wants to point a gun back at person C because he doesn't want to be forced to do something he doesn't want to do? What's person C going to do? Say that person A doesn't get to use force, even though person C is doing what he's doing through force? How does person C have any legitimacy here at that point?
Here's a good counterexample. I'm walking down the street and I see someone muttering to themselves, I can't take it anymore. I just want to end it all. A bus is speeding along and I see this person about to make the leap in front of the speeding bus. Are you saying that by me tackling this person can't be justified? What if they weren't proclaiming suicidal threats and were distracted by their cell phone? Is that too unjustifiable? What about someone restraining someone about to do something stupid that could kill them? Would Shane say that it was unjustifiable to forcibly prevent his kid from wanting to play with an alligator? I hope not.
Before we talk about that, the executioner is still talking about vaccines. I knew that was going to happen. Like once you mentioned vaccines,
I'm ignoring it now.
What is the Star Wars reference? Like, it will forever dominate your destiny. We'll get to vaccines in another video, I promise. Okay, so
Or maybe I should debate voluntary Japan. That'd probably be a good idea. I know he's been wanting to have a discussion with me about it for a while.
I offer to moderate if that's something you guys want.
I have to do my homework again.
So I would moderate pretty neutrally, actually. I see both sides. So anyway, all right. So if you tackle the distracted or suicidal person and they don't consent, I would say that you violated the NAP, and I would evidence that by saying like they should have the right to defend themselves against you diving them. Like if somebody's trying to commit suicide and you act with force to stop them, they still have the right to self-defense to stop you from initiating force on them. So like, what say you to that? Because I don't see this as a rebuttal to. I guess maybe two questions. What do you think about my position, and how is your position a rebuttal to Killian?
Okay, so I work in medicine. I'm still wearing my gi. There's been examples where I have gone into a room, found somebody, and proceeded to get me and all my friends to go in and break every single one of their ribs without their consent. This has happened. And as someone who has this medical license and is seeing, hold on.
So is this a medical scenario?
Bear with me.
Okay.
No, these are actual scenarios that I have done. All right. I also have an obligation, being a CPR certification, to do the same thing if I'm walking down the street and I see someone, dead, to go ahead and break, or quote unquote dead. They're not really technically dead. They're just legally dead. To go and break every single one of the ribs in the rib cage. And this process is called CPR, and it's a life-saving process. And everyone who's in the medical field, up to including janitors, have to at least in this state, have to get their CPR card. And one of the obligations, it's not like a law written. I think maybe there's some states where there's a law. If you have a CPR card, you have to do something. As far as I know, not in the state of Nevada, but I'd feel morally obligated to rescue someone and do CPR on them, not mouth to mouth on a stranger, obviously. But chest compressions, which in most cases breaks every single one of the ribs in the rib cage to save their life. This is the thing that happens. This would be, under this view, a violation of non-aggression principle. They didn't advocate for it. They're not. I don't know if they have advocated. That's what they wanted. They've never. I don't know. Especially if it's like a public situation. If it's at a clinical setting, then yeah. they're kind of sort of implying consent by not signing a DNR. But whatever. But if it's on a public street or something like that, I'm kind of, expected to do something and break every single one of the ribs. They don't agree to this. They never express a disagreement. They're not wearing a wristband saying DNR or, give me CPR or anything like that. And I'd be basically violating the non-aggression principle by, breaking every single one of their ribs in order to save their life, but in order to break one of their ribs. It's kind of the same ethical dilemma. It's not the same situation, but it's definitely the same dilemma. If I see someone, walking by and I grab them and do that. Now, can that action be justified? Yeah, I do believe that all of those actions can be justified. I mean, there's situations where they wouldn't be justified, like if someone was just walking down the street, not in any danger at all, and I grab them, or if I see someone just laying down, getting some sun, and I started doing chest compressions, that'd be breaking every one of their ribs. That would definitely not be justified. So I think there's actions that you can do where you can say like, yeah, that's justified. You can justify those actions for sure, and they don't consent to it.
I wanted to, sorry for the pause. I was just making sure. I didn't want to interrupt you. I've been doing that a lot. I apologize. So I'm
bad with it. I'm sorry, but I've done radio. That's why.
yeah. Don't take it as an offense. So their consent determines if it's a NAP violation. So if you are cracking ribs to resuscitate them, and they wake up and they're like, "Oh God, thank you so much," there was no NAP violation. They consented, and they evidenced they told you that they consented. If they wake up and be like, "God damn it, you woke me up and you broke my ribs, I'm suing you," well, then there was a NAP violation, and good luck in court, and good luck getting ostracized for persecuting a guy that tried to save your life, and good luck getting awarded damages, and watch the community raise money to help you in your defense. But just because there was a NAP violation in a situation that's kind of shitty, doesn't mean that that's a flaw in the NAP. It's just a shitty. It's like an uncomfortable interpretation of the situation. But look, if the person doesn't consent to you breaking their ribs to save their life, that's their consent. That is their right to do so.
But if it's a violation, I ought not do it. Correct? If it's unethical to do it, and you're making ought statements like this is the way things is. People have self ownership. People, the proof is on the active side. UPB is true. There is universal preferable behavior, like whatever, pick your poison. All of them are saying these are ought statements, that you ought not violate the non-aggression principle. If that's the case, I didn't get consent to break these people's ribs, and you can't really do that. What's the term? Like, you can't apply that consent retroactively. I can't say like, well, in the future they're going to agree to me doing this. I mean, you could have a reasonable guess that they would, and you'd probably be right. But we've known lots of examples of people suing, and they're going like, dude, we have Good Samaritan laws. You can't do that. Well,
and so any society I would live in would have agreements in place to cover that scenario with like the exact same example of the Good Samaritan laws. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That is a society that I would want to live in. But I think maybe that's a difference between like, I often use this analogy on the island versus in the city. Like if you just take raw philosophy, raw non-aggression principle on an island, two guys by themselves on an island, this is how the NAP would function. In a society that I would live in, I would damn well sure want Good Samaritan laws to protect people potentially injuring me and violating the non-aggression principle for the purpose of saving my life. That is a society I would want to live in, but I would do so voluntarily.
Yeah, but there is a way around it. There is a way around it. You could have everybody, say like, hey, if you're going to live in this city, we have ordinances, covenant community, deed restrictions, whatever you want to call it. Part of if you condition of living in this apartment complex is you have to wear one of these little bracelets that either say CPR or DNR. Sure, you could do something like that. But again, it's like if we're out in the wilderness, or if we're outside of that city, or we're outside of that building, and I see someone just collapse on the floor and they're not breathing, I'm cracking some ribs.
You crack some ribs and they wake up
I don't
and
want to.
they have a problem with it, then you owe restitution for the ribs, and good luck in that situation. I mean that's dumb and shitty, but like that's not. My point is that's not a flaw in the non-aggression principle.
Well,
that's just an uncomfortable result that we don't like.
It's a flaw if it's a universally applied deontological ethical system.
Why?
Because you're providing
you
an
want to be able to
example
crack
where that's
ribs?
okay. Well, I don't want to. I mean, I'd rather just sit home and play Mario Maker all day.
No, I'm saying, why is it a flaw?
I don't want to have you ever done CPR? It's not fun. It's not fun. You do it for like a few minutes. You're like, all right, I'm done.
I was trained. It's a beating, yes, but probably not as trained as you are.
Yeah, it's actual world experience, not with a dummy and stuff. Yeah.
I was trained on like little baby dolls, and like you have to like do this thing. And then you're like, you got to save their life, but you don't want to push too hard on it. Anyway.
Yeah. I don't work in pediatrics, so thank God for that. So that's great. I usually work in psych or Alzheimer's or dementia, stuff like that. So.
Which is a whole other ethical discussion with people that don't have, like agency and sentience or varying degrees of agency and sentience. But I don't bring this up. I don't think I bring up any sort of thing like that in here. So, yeah. And another thing along the lines of covenant community, but like a sidecar to it would just be private property solves a lot of this. You could just have the rules for my property are if you have a heart attack, we're going to break some ribs to save you. If you don't like that rule, get off my property. Like that's just what we do here kind of thing.
Or wear a DNR bracelet. Do not resuscitate.
Yeah. We'll put a stamp on your hand like you're going into a club.
You can only see it with a black light, so you're okay. Just don't wash your hands.
Yep. Okay, so we are 15 minutes in. Let's continue.
All right.
Property rights is the logical structure we use to determine who is initiating force and when. This isn't a pragmatic idea. It, too, is based on first principles. We start with the principle of self-ownership. Basically, you own yourself. You own your body, your mind, your time, and the fruits of your labors. Why?
I'm not sure that he has properly connected the earlier numbers to number 6. And here's why. Maybe you're about to say this and I'm just going to repeat what you say, but once you say the word ownership, you are implying a property system. And there's all like that goes into what we were talking about earlier with like, how do you come to own property? You have to prove ownership. What are the rules of that ownership that is reciprocated by people? Like this is another thing I say with rights is that rights are, what are rights and who gets them? Rights are mutual reciprocal understandings between sentient people. And then my should is they should be afforded to everyone that is sentient or will become sentient. And so that's a whole rubric of things that, you have to take as an assumption to get to his number 6. The whole ownership paradigm is involved here, and I don't see how he got to number 6 from number 1. What do you think? Or maybe you're about to say in the video, I should just say
in this video I say, I agree, but these premises don't lead up to that. By the way, there was one thing that I didn't mention in here, and I even wrote notes down. So when we were talking about earlier about Socrates and his rule of non-contradiction, and he said that, or Shane said that the rule of the law of non-contradiction is something can't be A and not A at the same time, where Socrates says no, it's something can't be A and not A at the same time in the same respect. So we can imagine O.J. Simpson literally guilty of murder, legally innocent. So he's both A and B at the same time, assuming that he murdered. Obviously he didn't. I don't want to get sued. but we can imagine that someone can be guilty and not guilty. Yeah. But they're in different senses of the word. So that's kind of important. So we can imagine a scenario where there's maybe groups of people who have the legitimate use of initiatory force. And people have made this argument. I don't agree with it, but people have made this argument to say okay, but now he's stumbled on something where he's like, okay, you have all this stuff, and it contradicts this law of non-contradiction, but it doesn't contradict it if they're gonna claim, which they probably will, But if they're going to claim that, no, this is force in a different sense of the word, because we're not using force in the sense of the word, that you and I would commit aggression, but those people are allowed to commit aggression. So he didn't cover his base as well. He needs to have that extra step to say, no. Now here's the reason why, even if you got a shiny badge, you don't have any special rights. And I think that that's a crucial step that he missed in the process. One that's definitely needed.
And that's a valid step. Like it becomes
right.
more valid when you add that step. I agree with you there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Continuing.
Well, what would it mean if you didn't? Who else would own you? If someone else can own you, that would make you...
Executioner's still talking about vaccines. Dude.
Don't. Stop.
Okay.
They're slaves. But slavery completely violates the consistency principle. Who gets to own slaves, and who is subject to being enslaved? You would be making different rules for different people, which you don't get to do.
I agree, but 3, 4, and 5 are insufficient in supporting this.
Also
So self-ownership is the only consistent way, and that naturally leads to private property.
Again, I agree, but 3, 4, and 5 are insufficient in supporting this claim.
So from nothing more...
I wish you had taken the time to say what you just said. Like, you know what pisses me off about YouTube is that you can never go back and edit your videos. Like if I discover a flaw in my video, the best I can do is like pin a comment. Edit the description. Yeah.
Well, I'm making this one. Maybe I should just re-upload this video if it's okay with you. I don't believe in intellectual property, and I know you don't, but I want your blessing.
You have my
I don't
blessing.
believe in intellectual property. Like Kinsella is 100% right on all that stuff. I'm totally on board, and I've made videos arguing the stuff, and made podcasts arguing about the stuff. But I do think it's kind of weird that like people re-upload stuff without their blessing. It's like so I tell people, like, go ahead and re-upload my stuff. A lot of my stuff was Bitcaught, which I don't even think it even exists anymore, that says that you can re-upload any of my stuff so long as you're not a government agent. But now it's kind of like, that meme's dead. So now I'm just Creative Commons Zero. I don't care. You re-upload my stuff. But I'm all about like, if you don't want me to do it, I won't do it because I'm a nice guy. But
you have my blessing.
Your intellectual property belief is garbage either way.
Wait, I'm not advocating IP, just to be clear.
I know.
Let me be clear.
But libertarians do. Yeah. We just had one pass away, rest in peace, Neil J. Shulman.
Libertarians do. All right.
No. J. Neil Shulman, he's libertarian.
Well, he's libertarian to the degree he conforms to libertarian principle, and IP is not part of that. It's not valid in as part of libertarian principle, right? So at least you could, the closest thing you could probably say is a less consistent libertarian then. Yeah.
Well, rest in peace. He was a good guy.
I don't know who we're talking about, so.
J. Neil Shulman?
If I'm talking shit, I don't know. Yeah.
Alongside Knight? Yeah. Oh, anyways.
Oh, okay. All right. Big play.
More than a logical examination of first principles, we come to the following inescapable conclusion. Taking of legitimately owned property cannot be defended. Owning property is passive. Taking that property is active. At the very least, as we discussed earlier, the burden of proof is on the side of the property taker.
Now, this is just a rehashed version of number 5, but I might as well try again. I, nor most people, nor you, hopefully would be okay with not intervening if they saw a loved one putting a gun they owned in their mouth and threatening to pull the trigger. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant squeeze the trigger. I hear that's only okay if you say it. Or if your child wraps his jump rope around his neck and ties the other side to the top of a door. And because there's problems with number 3 and number 4, this can't follow. Number 3.
Except for what you added there.
Preferable behavior.
Okay, so we finished
the child stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we kind of finished the Killian section. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we move on?
Pretty much like the whole, he got the law of non-contradiction wrong, and because of that, he should have added an extra step saying, which I still wouldn't have fixed the problem. There's a lot of other problems with it, obviously, but that definitely would have helped to make it a lot better to say, okay, here's the reason why having a shiny badge doesn't matter, and you would need to have an extra step for that. And if you would have done that, it would have improved it a lot. But I think it's just because I don't know. There's just a lot of kind of things that kind of go around, and like you pick up on them, and you're like, oh, okay, this is in philosophy. I guess I agree with it. That people just completely misunderstand, like Schrodinger's cat. Like I don't think I've ever heard anybody explain Schrodinger's cat to me that's accurate. unless it's been from a quantum physicist. And I'm like, okay, I understand that. I don't understand what the fuck you just said. But everybody else who explains it to me, I'm just like, that's not what they're saying. That's not what they're saying. Because I can understand what you're saying. And because I can understand what you're saying, it's clearly not what they're saying. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, okay. Anyways, yeah.
So somebody asked what IP is. It's intellectual property. So copyright, patent, trade secrets, trademarks. Those are things called intellectual property. It's a form of property that only exists because the government threatens people with government guns into behaving in a certain way to sort of fabricate this new form of property out of thin air that didn't exist absent the government's guns. It is using the government to control people's behavior with their actual tangible property. What I mean by that is, like, if I took a piece of paper and I drew a face on that piece of paper, the moment I finished that face and held it up to the camera, you know, I would own the copyright to that face, to that shape, to that pattern of ink on the paper, and through government guns would instantly have a slice of control over all of your pieces of paper and over a slice of the control over your hard drive if you went into Photoshop and drew that same face pattern, and, you know, over all of your property that could be fashioned into that same shape. I use government guns to control your behavior and your actual property to prevent you from using it in a way so as to copy my pattern. Obviously, that's not valid. It's an initiation of force to use government guns to control your actual property.
And the term intellectual property didn't come around until the United States kind of government kind of got founded, where they wanted to keep all these, what they were used to call back in the day, intellectual monopolies. But because they knew that the population was not going to be like, hey, we just fought a revolutionary war against these mercantilist pieces of garbage, like, we don't want to go back to that. They were like, no, it's not a monopoly. It's ownership of property. So they renamed it. And so the term intellectual property is actually a marketing term. It's not actually based on any kind of real philosophy.
I didn't know that. That's very interesting. Yeah. Thank you. I learned two things. Let's see. Eric Michael Forsay says property rights are natural. They will exist without humans and exist currently with humans. I would disagree with that. So property is a concept. Concepts don't exist in reality. They exist only in the minds of people that have the capacity, or beings that have the capacity to conceptualize. The best definition of reality that I've ever heard so far is reality is that which continues to exist even after you stop believing in it. If there was no one around to hold the concept of property in their mind, then property ceases to exist. So if you disagree, I'm interested in your arguments on that. Do you have anything to say about that? We're digressing all over the place.
Yeah, nice spooks, nerd.
Well, that was easy. Moving on.
But no. So kind of this kind of set the premise, because we're not. It's going to happen after this section. We're talking about consequentialism. Like, we understand that if you have a society that bases its kind of rules on property norms, that you have a more prosperous society. Same thing with markets. Same thing with individual autonomy. Like, we know free trade. We know that these things have very positive outcomes. And sure, they're just abstractions that are things that are in our head. But if they have a positive outcome, that we all agree that we want these positive outcomes, there's nothing wrong with it. Even though it is a spook, just don't die for those things. Don't hold them over your own
I wouldn't
life.
say that there aren't spooks worth dying for. I mean, certainly there's concepts worth dying for, right? Do you disagree with that?
I disagree.
Really? So there's no concept that is not worth, like a familial relationship is a concept. Like, they're your daughter, but that relationship is entirely conceptual.
Well, I don't have a kid, but let's just say my nephew. Here we go. So, like, I would die for my nephew, but my nephew exists. It's not a spook. It's not an abstraction.
Yeah, but a bunch of humans exist. Why? The only thing that makes that particular one special is, like, your conceptual understanding of that relationship, right?
No, because I know this person and I like this person. So I would take a bullet for my nephew.
Right? Knowing somebody's a spook.
No, because they're actually an actual person that exists, unlike something like a nation or God. I'm sorry if you're Christian, but
like what I'm saying is there's a lot of other people that also exist, but you're not going to die to defend them. So the thing that makes your nephew different from all the other people that you wouldn't die is the concept of the relationship that you have with them.
Perhaps, but it's because it's not a spook, because they're an actual person that exists.
Well, all the other people are people too. So why wouldn't you die for them?
So why wouldn't I don't know, a patriot, a United States patriot, whatever we want to call them, sovereign citizen who would die for their country? Why wouldn't they die for North Korea?
Well, let's stay on our analogy so that we don't.
Right, but people choose what they want to do. So like I would choose to die for my nephew because I think that his life would be more valuable than mine. But that's not because of any spook, just because, I want to set the table for the future of my kids, even though the universe dies when I die. That doesn't necessarily follow that I should leave it a bigger mess than I left it.
And I'm pointing out that the differentiator between your nephew and everyone else is merely conceptual.
Well, biological.
How is that not conceptual?
It's not conceptual. It's
like you share genes with every other human. It's just to what degree?
I don't share that many genes with all those people.
Like we share genes with monkeys too, to a varying degree.
But I share even more. Yeah, I share even more.
But you didn't bring up like genes when I asked you earlier. You said it's like a relationship you have with him. You know him. That's conceptual.
Perhaps.
I'm just saying that's a spook you'd die for.
But that's an actual thing that I can point to and say this is an actual person. Whereas dying for property rights, I can't point to a property right. I can die for my government, but I can't really point to my finger and say that's the government because that's just an abstraction.
You made a pretty staunch claim that there are no spooks you'd die for. I was just trying to bring up one.
Okay.
Like, what's wrong with saying you'd die for a spook?
But
like,
then again,
why isn't there a concept you'd die for? Like, why is that a bad thing?
Because I don't want to hold anything over my own self unless I want to put it there. Because again, I'm not a complete Sternerite anymore. But there, Satanism and stuff. But I wouldn't die for Satanism. No, it's just some shit that some carny in San Francisco made up.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Ready to move on? Are we good?
Which I love Anton, but I mean, basically what's happening. Yeah, let's go.
I have a profile picture when I shaved my head for my daughter, and everybody started saying I looked like him. Let me pull it up. Check this out.
Yeah, you do kind of look like Anton, but with hair.
Yeah, well, I shaved my head because my daughter was going through chemo and she lost her hair.
Oh.
And so when I shaved my head, everybody was like, "Oh my God, Anton LaVey." Here it is. Check this out. You see that?
Yeah, that's it.
Right?
That's him. Yep. You should have got that cute little robe that he wears with the little plush like devil horns sticking out of it and everything.
I want to get that anyway, just for general use. All right, hitting play.
The change my mind things you do in Acapulco.
Oh yeah,
we're playing devil's advocate.
Now I could do a whole video on Stefan Molyneux's universe.
Did you watch those? I had a blast doing those. There's a playlist on our channel for anybody wanting to know what we're talking about. I took the position that taxation is not theft and tried to get a bunch of anarchists to debate me on it.
Well, right. You're wrong. It's actually extortion, but either way. Actually. Yeah.
Actually. Personally preferable behavior and how bad it is, and I almost did in a live stream. But I'm not going to explain what UPB is here because it is too dense and too nonsensical, and the subject would overrun my entire video. So if you're familiar with this, this may be useful to understanding its flaws.
Which, by the way,
if you don't understand it...
I did do an 8-hour live stream. I love that
Not
video.
an argument!
Then you'll be armed with enough information to go into universally preferable
I
behavior.
substantiated that it was nonsensical when I did an 8-hour long live stream.
Yeah, but not in this
entire
video.
audiobook.
Look, I've been waiting for months to use that meme, and I finally had the opportunity.
There was a few non-arguments made in this video. Sure.
Where the flaws are. Either way, I'll keep this very brief. The problem with UPB lies in the idea that people who do go into a debate are interested in the facts and seeking truth, and not just trying to win points with peers, try to defend ideas based on faith and not evidence, and to defend one's ego, Molyneux, or to spread false information to achieve some kind of goal. Kind of like...
Not an argument!
But actually it is an argument though, because it is a reason why someone would engage in an argument without truth being their primary focus.
I see good property debate going on in the comments, and this is like where, like, if anybody cares that the stream is going 17 hours, let's do it, because there's a lot of good shit to talk about. But Eric, you said that the second you treat something like property, it is property. I disagree. Like, again, property is a concept of rights. Rights are a mutual reciprocal understanding between sentient minds. If you cannot conceptualize of property, then you cannot own property. You can't, like, accidentally fall into an entire complicated interpersonal system of what to do and what not to do with other people. Like, that is property. Like, when I say that this guy owns his microphone, like, there's a lot of meaning and restrictions on behavior that come with that concept. If you don't have the capacity to conceptualize, if you can't conceptualize property, then you can't be a property owner. It's just, like, definitional.
How about this? Do I own this? Do I own this? Nintendo says I technically don't.
Well, you own the box,
but I mean,
intellectual property is not valid property, so.
Right.
You own the
I
media.
mean, I own it. It's mine.
But I think he's talking about, like, animals owning things, like an animal that defends a bone would own the bone. I'm saying if he can't conceptualize property, he can't participate in the system of property with other minds. He can't reciprocate property because he can't even understand it.
Well, there's an argument for property in toto, which is you basically own the things that you can defend against, which is technically true.
Well, that's just might makes right.
If you want,
that's sub ethics. Right. That's like if we're going to elevate ourselves out of the animal kingdom, you know,
right?
Like,
I mean, but that's what's actually true. But we can say property norms are good because it has beneficial consequences that I think all of us would agree with, except for maybe a few crazy people. All of us agree with that. That's probably a good rule to set in place. However, those rules of property norms fall apart when you start talking about intellectual property, because all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, I can only own something that's mine for 25 years in trademark, or no trademark, or what is it? Oh, geez, forgetting all the term limits for this. It's my lifetime plus the estate for 75 years or something like that, which they're probably going to renew it because Mickey Mouse will go in the public domain for certain types of things. It's 25 years. For certain other types of things, it's 10 years. Like, what do you mean I can only own a patent for 10 years? Then you don't really own it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. That's ridiculous. Like, you can only own property for 10 years. Like, no.
Eric says if an animal can't conceptualize property, why do they defend territory? Because their genes tell them to. So, you know, the difference in levels of sentience is the difference in levels of self-actualization. Like the ability to reason, to put reason behind your actions as opposed to just doing what your instincts tell you to do. Like a dog is not defending a bone because he has decided to homestead that bone. He's doing it because his programming tells him to. All right.
Well, they believe in property in toto. They can understand that, but they can't understand property norms. So they can't work through that.
There you go. Okay. UPB incoming.
How accelerationists will argue that universal basic income is a sound economic policy to people knowing that it will bring upon a governmental collapse. He also points out that just you living is proof of universally preferable behavior, because in order for you to be here to begin with, you would have had to have breathed, ate food, drank liquids, etc. in order to live. Unfortunately, this is all true for people who have extreme suicidal ideations. People don't necessarily do these things because they want to survive, but do them because they don't want to deal with the uncomfortable or painful experience of being deprived of these things, like starvation and dehydration. He also falsely claims that breathing is a choice, when in reality, that breathing is both an involuntary and voluntary option, which is why you don't hear about people killing themselves by holding their breath.
So what's the difference in the reasoning to choose to live being between not wanting to die and not wanting to experience death? It seems like a distinction without a difference. It seems like you've almost like just restated UPB and confirmed it rather than rebut it.
Okay, so in order for us to be here having a discussion about UPB, like we had to have, according to UPB, which are in our universal preferable behaviors, but if it's true that we've done things, that are universally preferable behavior, trying to have a discussion about whether or not universally preferable behavior exists, and the fact that I have done it and arguing against it is a performative contradiction, right? However, you don't know if I have suicidal ideations. Like I could after the stream's over, I can go put a gun in my mouth. But the reason why I'm doing things like breathing and eating food and consuming delicious Diet Dr. Pepper is because I don't want to deal with the uncomfortable situations that come with dehydration, starvation, or suffocation. And not only that, but I mean, like I can't kill myself by holding my breath. That's not something people do. That's why people hang themselves. That's why people drown themselves. Because you can't, or put things over their face, suffocate them.
So you find the process of suicide uncomfortable, therefore you choose to live. Like, the reason why you choose to live could just be because you don't want to not exist, or it could be because you find suffocation uncomfortable, let's say. But the reason why you choose life is immaterial to the fact that you did, at least for the moment, you've chosen to live. Okay, so
I just don't want to deal with the uncomfortable way of dying in that particular way. I definitely want to kill myself. Theoretically, I don't. I'm fine. I enjoy life.
No, I got it. Nobody here wants to kill each other. Kill each other. Kill himself. Whatever. Same.
Yeah. Theoretically, let's say that I'm extremely suicidal, and I've already told you that I'm going to kill myself after the stream, and you're like, well, how come you're drinking your Dr. Pepper there? Why don't you just dehydrate yourself to death? It's like, well, no, I got a shotgun over there. I'm just going to do it that way. It's quicker. You just do it that way.
Yeah, but for right now, you've chosen to live, and for your entire life, since you had the ability to control your actions, you took actions to continue living. Like, from moment to moment, that was 100,000 million decisions you made to continue living along the way. So maybe in the future, you don't choose life, and you're no longer sort of subject to UPB, because in the future you've changed your mind. But as of now, and as of all the years you've lived, you have chosen.
No, but the choice wasn't whether or not to live or die, because I've already chosen to die in this theoretical situation. I just don't want to die by that particular means.
Okay.
Let's just say that I've had a long history of mental illness. These people exist. Suicidal ideations are that complex, and they even start at infancy and stuff. I've done everything that I could in order to kill myself. It's just that, being hungry sucks. I mean, ever had hunger pains? It sucks. I went on a vegan diet for a while, and if I didn't eat for an hour, it was like hunger pains, which I've never experienced before. And I was like, no, I do not want to deal with that reality. So I'm going to just off myself real quick. But, to be comfortable while I'm doing that, I'm going to go and have some KFC, which I don't know why anyone would want to eat KFC, but whatever. I'm suicidal. Why wouldn't I eat KFC?
Yeah, but being suicidal while choosing to live is still choosing to live.
Oh, we're not choosing to live. You're choosing to die. You're choosing to be comfortable.
You're choosing to die later, but right now you're following UPB.
No, you're choosing to be comfortable until you die.
Right. So until you die, you're following UPB.
You're making the choice to die. Like I make a choice to go see a concert, right? Just because I'm not going there right now doesn't mean that I'm refusing to go. Like, no, I'm going. I bought the ticket, taking the ride.
And until you take the ride, you're choosing to continue following UPB.
Well, no. We're choosing not to go to the concert.
I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over. Like, until you choose to kill yourself, you are choosing to not kill yourself.
No,
like you are choosing to not kill yourself now, and you're planning on choosing to kill yourself tomorrow or whatever.
Okay. However, but you can't bring up breathing either way. You can't bring up breathing as a reason for that.
Why?
Because breathing is technically not a choice.
I mean, why is that important? I guess this is my question.
Well, it was one of his reasons.
I didn't bring up breathing. Okay, look, I didn't have a problem with that. Like, breathing is so vital a behavior that it's been automated. Like, it's so vital a behavior that it's been automated. But yeah, that's not a hill I want to die on.
Yeah, it's involuntary.
Well, you can choose to stop breathing, right? You can put a bag over your head. You can put a bag over your head and prevent yourself from even breathing after you lose consciousness. Like, you can take steps to stop your breathing if you really wanted to.
But to say that breathing is voluntary is not true.
continuing.
If you have to force yourself to stop, it's not really voluntary in the way that he's doing it. In terms of I'm eating food. I don't have to eat food. I can be anorexic.
But you could say it's UPB to not let a plastic bag get wrapped around your head, because to choose life, you need to ensure that you continue breathing.
Right, but that is an action that you would have to take to stop something that you're actively doing, right? So by me
continually make that decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't make the decision when I sleep. It's automated.
True, but
Okay.
you probably make sure that you sleep in a safe place. I mean, I don't know if you have a significant other that's kind of dangerous or something, but Okay.
Well, I am a Satanist. There's a bit of spikes right there. No, I'm just kidding. A bit of
unless you're around to break my ribs and make sure that I'm forced to continue living, it's UPB at least. But I mean, we can continue.
Okay.
I'm reading comments too.
Okay.
Man, they're just flying by, guys. I'm not going to be able to keep up with this. So if you really want us to address something, we have super chats for that. Moving on.
Asphyxiate themselves by other means, because after a while, your medulla oblongata kicks in and forces you to inhale. Also, asphyxiating yourself would be an action, not an inaction, thus rendering his whole point moot. Also, one can make the claim with empirical data. The reason any of us are here because some...
Yeah, I don't feel a need to defend the breathing thing.
Somewhere down your line, someone was raped to give birth to one of your ancestors. Lots of times in your lineage, in fact. Do we now say that rape is now moral because your existence is predicated on rape? Of course not.
No, but he's saying, hold the fuck on.
Okay. So I need to explain this because again, the point of this whole section was the UPB is a whole long thing, and it's going to take like a full hour for me to explain what UPB is and then explain all the things wrong with it. Even topically, it would be a big issue. So I was just like, I could not condense it down. So I'm just going to give people with a few pieces of information. They go into it and take it as they want, armed with a little bit of information, and they can go, oh, okay, I see some problems with this now. Okay. So what he's saying that is like, you can't argue against things, that is vital for your existence, right? Things like eating, breathing, having sex, right? Consensual sex. Like your parents, gave birth to you and ever. But it's like, well, you can make the same argument for rape. Like every single person who has ever lived has had somebody down their evolutionary line. Very many people who was a result of rape, be it marital rape, be it arranged marriages. You've had just even like in primitive days. Prehistory, everybody was constantly raping each other.
It's not a requirement. So
conquest.
A building might have a building might have one of its bricks built out of granite, but that doesn't mean that all buildings have to be made from granite to exist. Like for buildings to exist, they must be built out of granite. No, like some buildings are partially made of granite. It doesn't mean that it's required for buildings to exist.
But you exist as a result of rape.
But I could also exist as a result of consensual sex.
Right.
I could have also existed as a result of consensual sex between the same two humans, is what I'm saying. Like it's also possible. It's not a requirement.
But you can't say that you can't build a house out of granite if one of your blocks is made out of granite.
Say that again?
You can't say that you can't build a house out of granite if one of your bricks are made of granite, right?
That's not the claim I made. I'm just saying, like,
right, but that's the claim that he's making.
let's assume that I'm a rape baby.
Okay.
Like I think that was your example. Correct me if I'm wrong. The same two humans could have got together and had consensual sex and also produced this exact person.
Right, but those people exist only because of rape.
But they could have also existed not because of rape. Like a building could also exist made out of some other material. Buildings can still exist.
Right, but again, you would be arguing against your own existence.
No, because I could have been brought into existence by other ways outside of rape.
Right. But your great grandmother was raped, and her great grandmother was raped, and her great grandmother was raped, and her mother was raped. On and on and on and on and on.
That sounds terrible.
So, but that's the way human existence exists. So unfortunately, that's true. I mean, back in those days, it was an awful, terrible time. And also, there was also things like arranged marriages. Marital rape was just a normal. It wasn't even called rape back then. It was just marital sex. It doesn't matter if you're married. That's consent, according to a lot of these people. And a lot of people were raped, and a lot of people are the products of rape.
I'm not disputing that
directly.
I'm not disputing
somewhere
that.
down your line. So if you are the product of rape, you're arguing against your own existence by saying rape is not UPB.
I'm saying that that's non sequitur because I could also exist. All of those sexual interactions could have also taken place voluntary, and I would still exist.
Right, but you exist as a product of rape, though.
I'm just saying.
Either way,
just because we're saying that I exist as a product of rape doesn't mean that I couldn't also exist as a product of consensual sex.
I agree. But what we do know that every single person on the face of the planet has had rape somewhere down their line. So for you to say that universally preferable behavior is, not rape can't be true because
are you making the argument that if not for rape, people would not exist?
The people that exist today.
Like you're saying that the people that exist today could not exist if not for rape?
Yeah,
because
those people would not have been born for the people to exist today to exist. There would be other people, but then you can make the claim. Yeah, UPB is not rape. Then you can make that claim, but we don't live in that world. And he's saying that if for certain things to happen, for you to even exist on this planet, like and for you to exist on this planet, like UPB must be true. So if this would have to qualify as UPB, at least in some form, or at least just be omitted and say, well, rape doesn't apply to UPB or something like that. We're only going to talk about these other types of actions that are happening because people exist as a product of rape. Every single person on this planet exists as a product of rape.
But it's not impossible for the same people to exist as products of consensual sex, is what I'm saying. Like you can imagine a universe where the same people exist and all that sex that you're saying was rape was consensual. Like it's not. And you can't say that they must. You can't say that the only reason they exist is because of rape. If you can also say that they could have existed without it.
But those people would have a legitimate claim then. Because why don't they have a legitimate claim now? Because their existence isn't predicated on rape. However, ours is.
But it's not predicated. It's not. You can't say it's predicated if it wasn't a requirement. Like it could have happened another way. I could still exist without the rape. Us. So I'm not predicated on rape. That's just how it happened.
But not us.
I'm not predicated on rape. That's just how my lineage lined up.
Right. But we wouldn't exist then. It would be some other people. No,
I'm saying I could have come to existence in the same form if those instances had been consensual. So you can't say that I'm predicated on rape if that was a possibility, which it was.
No, this is like was it the butterfly effect, right? I think that's what it's called. Where you,
I understand.
If you go back in time, you crush it, everything comes completely different. We wouldn't exist. If your great whoever it was grandmother wasn't raped, you wouldn't exist. Someone else would exist. Or maybe that whole lineage, maybe she didn't give birth at all, and that whole lineage is just gone.
I'm not saying. All I'm saying is that it could have happened consensually, and I could exist with the same genetic code or whatever.
No,
so you can't say I'm not predicated on it. Yeah, if the same people got together and had consensual sex instead of rape, I could exist in the same form. It's not impossible. So because it was possible, you can't say I'm predicated on it.
No, but you do exist as a product of rape. Okay, so what Molyneux was saying is that, like, in order for you to even exist in this discussion about whether or not UPB is true, you've had to have done UPB. Your existence is predicated on UPB, and that applies down the line, right?
Okay.
Your great ancestors ate food. Your great ancestors, all that stuff. Okay, so if that's true, then we can say that every single person in this world has existed because of rape. So we can't really make a moral claim. We can't make a moral claim on rape, or we say that rape can be okay.
Okay, I'm definitely repeating myself because my response to that is to say that every single person that exists in this world could also exist without the rape that happened.
And I'm saying the butterfly effect shows that that's not correct.
Okay, I'm failing to communicate something. So
No. I'm saying it's possible for it to be true, but it's not true. And Molyneux's talking about what is true, scientifically is true, not theoretically true. He's talking about what is true because he's also rooting this in science as well. It's not just philosophy too. He thinks this is a scientific fact that we're all part of this thing. And, he just presumes that like everybody up to now was kind of involved in, consensual sex with the lone couple exceptions who were rape babies. But, like humans were rife with rape all the way up until like, even up until recently.
I don't know. I don't know that.
I mean, yeah. So UPB kind of really relies on things that like we know that humans. This is one of the claims that he makes in his book. This is why I needed an 8-hour long video to explain this stuff because it's weird.
Okay.
So
I want to revisit UPB soon and do a deep dive on it. So why don't we leave this here and maybe if I read it and I don't see a problem, then I'll reach out to you and you can challenge me on it again. So yeah. UPB is a thick book that's not easy to read.
Oh, it's only 140 pages or something like that. It's pretty small.
I mean, you have thick in I didn't mean thick in pages. Sorry, I meant thick in.
Well, get ready for that not an argument video again.
Not an argument.
Okay,
because it's thick-headed.
All right, Molyneux. All right, let's get Molyneux out of here. Moving on. Okay, hitting play.
Consequentialist problems with the non-aggression principle. 1. Infeasibility. Now, when I say that the NAP is impossible for anyone to follow or to have a legal standard implemented, this doesn't mean that it's impossible to enforce it 100% or to follow it 100%. That's not what that means. What I mean is that you can't implement such a legal order, nor live in a world that prohibits it. In his book, The Machinery of Freedom, which is standard implemented, this doesn't mean that it's impossible to enforce. Let's do a quick intermission. I have to use a bathroom. I have to use a little boy's room.
All right, cool.
Okay.
let me find something intermission. I'll engage. Let me talk to the comments.
Oh, they got that music. You got that. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Let me catch up on comments here. What are you guys talking about? I don't see any vaccine talk, so that's progress. How are you guys doing? Why do you think a squirrel can't conceptualize, these are my acorns and my home? That is literally the foundation of property. Yeah, that's not quite what I meant by conceptualization. So when I say they can't conceptualize property, I mean they can't conceptualize the concept called property. They can't, homestead property. They can't. They can't reciprocate property. They won't leave my nut alone because they understand and reciprocate property with me. Like they don't understand. They can't conceptualize that this is my nut and they're not going to take my nut. They're going to reciprocate property rights. That's what I'm saying they can't conceptualize. If you can't conceptualize property, then you're not part of the, you're not an ethical actor in the world of property. If you can't reciprocate the concept of property with other people, then you're not participating in this thing called property with the people around you. That's what I'm saying by conceptualized property. It's like if you, like a criminal, like a murderer is like a ghost in the land of ethics and morality. They don't exist in a way that would suggest that people should afford them rights because they gave up their claim to not being murdered when they murdered. So it's like they sort of ghosted themselves when it comes to the expectations of the people around them not to murder them. And the same thing is true for the squirrel, except they didn't lose their protection of property by stealing a nut. They never had a protection of property because they never began reciprocating property. They can't even conceptualize of this thing called property. They're a non-entity. They're a ghost in the land of property rights because they literally do not possess the capacity to participate with it. Woo! Captain Strangiato says, Jesus Jim, help, this man is spooked. I don't know who he's talking about.
He's telling me to help you because you're spooked.
Patrick, I'm spooked? That's like a basic definition of rights. It's not something that exists. It's a spook. It's a mutual reciprocal understanding between people. That's all it is. That's the definition of recognizing that it's a spook.
Yeah.
And if somebody doesn't, I'm not saying that your right to property exists in the world outside of your person. I'm saying it's a mutual agreement. That's a very delicate, breakable thing. Like, it's easy to screw up and accidentally hurt somebody else's property and sort of exempt yourself from the protection of property by doing so. If it were something that existed in the world, then it wouldn't be easy for me to violate. Like, something would happen to me if I damaged your property. It would be difficult for me to damage your property. So yeah. I don't know.
So Phobes made a comment talking about the UPB thing. I think we're probably going to end up having to do something about UPB, because it's like maybe we're not getting very clear about what UPB is.
I have three other requests that have come in over the past 6 months for me to do it, so it definitely needs to happen. So,
yeah, downline. I just did an 8-hour live stream about it.
Oh, you don't want to do another? I think we can do 15 hours tomorrow if you want. Like, I think we need to sell tickets for a UPB dome. And like just go. Yeah. Anyway.
That would be like multiple days, because it would be like, stop. Oh, wait, hold on. I disagree with this. And then you'd be like, wait, no, I'm fine with that. Like, okay, let's talk about this for an hour.
We can invite Molyneux on.
I'm persona non grata. Persona non grata.
Oh, really? What happened?
Yes.
Do tell.
I said the C word.
I want the dirt.
I said the dirty C word, and that's a no-no.
Cunt?
No, actually, the main reason why is...
Oh, consequentialism. Yeah, that's pretty bad.
No, cult.
Oh! Like, there's a lot of dirty C words.
But the reason why I got banned from all Molyneux's things wasn't because of that. It was because I said, hey, the DMCA is you filed a bunch of DMCAs against this critic of yours. Why? Like, why did you do that? And people were like, oh, no, that's a private YouTube policy. I'm like, no, actually, the DMCA is a law. It was passed 20 years ago in 1998 by Bill Clinton, or it wasn't 20 years then. It was 2014 or something. But anyways, it was like passed in 1998 by Bill Clinton, and these are just laws that YouTube has to comply with. The DMCA is a law that YouTube has to follow by law. And if they don't take down every single request, if they don't take down videos for every request that they get, they can lose their safe harbor provisions, and they would also have to owe companies like Viacom like more money than they possibly have, and they would go out of business. It's a threat against YouTube. Take this video down now, or we're going to strip you of everything that you have. And I was explaining this, and because I was explaining this to someone, just explain to me, like, what was the reason why you did this? Banned from the forum. I was immediately banned from him on Facebook, which I didn't. I only contacted him once on Facebook, where he was going to have a debate with Peter Joseph. He was having a debate with Peter Joseph. I thought he didn't have it yet, and I said, "Hey, best of luck." And he was like, "Thank you." That was the only interaction I've ever had with Molyneux on Facebook. He found me there and blocked me there. Found me on YouTube, blocked me there, and I was like, "Wow, you just complete shutdown." As soon as you mentioned DMCA, like, you were shut down. So, I am persona non grata.
Yeah, that's weird. I've never considered the YouTube thing. Like, they do have a terms of service, and you do agree to not upload infringing content, and but that's probably different than going out of your way to report something. I'll have to think about that more. Yeah, a
DMCA claim is not like a claim that you're filing with YouTube. It is a legal affidavit that you're signing under penalty of perjury that gets a copy sent to the both of your courthouses, both the one in Palo Alto, wherever they're from, and wherever yours is. And it's a legal request to take down something. And if you break the law by saying like, hey, as he was at the time, saying, hey, like, I don't believe in copyright. Do whatever you want with this stuff. Just spell my name right. That's what his claim was. And he's taking stuff down, which was fair use anyway. Even if he did claim copyright stuff, he was violating the law.
I've never tried to take down anybody's stuff, so I'm not sure what that entails. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. We're 2 hours, 40 minutes in. Let's try and at least finish the video. We can keep talking afterwards. I just want to at least get through this.
At 100% or to follow it 100%. That's not what that means. What I mean is that you can't implement such a legal order nor live in a world that prohibits it. In his book, The Machinery of Freedom, which I recommend to anybody interested in libertarianism to read, David writes a chapter about the consequentialist problems with the NAP in a chapter called Problems. Imagine a revolver pistol with 6 chambers.
I'll just say as like a preface, like I disagree with every single problem that people have brought up with the NAP ever. I've never found one yet that is actually a problem with the NAP. It's usually people not liking the outcome of the NAP and then saying that that's a problem with it. But
well, I thought we agreed that the CPR thing was a violation of the NAP.
Yeah, which is not a problem with the NAP. That just because you want to be able to break ribs doesn't mean the NAP is flawed.
No, I really don't want to. CPR sucks.
No, you know what I mean. Like just because you want to, just because you would save somebody's life and break their ribs and risk, that person not consenting to you doing that, which is kind of an absurd edge case anyway. But that's not a flaw in the NAP.
It's a very common thing though. It's a very common ethical dilemma.
I'm just saying that's not a flaw with the NAP. But anyway.
And only in one of those chambers houses a round. You spin the cylinder and press the gun against someone's temple and pull the trigger. Oh, sorry, squeeze the trigger. Whether or not a round discharge...
Okay, what was that from again? What was the squeeze
that was from the Shane Killian video. We're just talking about squeezing the trigger.
Oh, so Shane was the one that criticized calling it pull?
Yeah, people saying pull the trigger. Okay. And then later in the video, he said like twice, I think 2 other times in the video... I know Prom has the video. I could probably ask him for it. But no, like he said that like, people who say that, pull the trigger, that just shows how stupid they are about guns. Yeah. And then later on he says pull the trigger twice. And not referencing someone else saying it. It's like, no, and imagine this scenario and you pull the trigger type of thing. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And I just realized that because I streamed to a different link, this link has a 30-second delay on it. That's why comments are a little behind. We're dealing with a 30-second delay. That's my fault today, guys. I'm sorry for that. All right, continuing.
Charges, all libertarians would agree that this is a violation of the non-aggression principle, and it would be a violation if it was a 1 in 6 chance of discharging or a 1 in trillion chance, though that would be a pretty big fucking pistol. So how is it that we allow people to drive cars when even driving carefully could result in the injury or death of pedestrians and other motorists? Not even being at fault, fainting at the wheel, mechanical or computer failures, getting startled, whatever. And the odds of that happening are far more likely than 1 in a trillion. Ah, but intent matters. You're not trying to hurt anyone by driving, but you were intending to hurt someone with that gun. No, first intent doesn't matter. If I decide to dance on the wall of my third floor balcony and knock over one of my planters on accident and smash your car's windshield, does that not mean I'm not responsible for my actions because my intent wasn't to cause harm? Secondly, you don't know what my motivation for doing that with a gun. If my intent was to cause harm, don't you think it would have been counterintuitive to only load the chamber with only 1 bullet? Or at least make sure that the next chamber would have had that bullet? Or that I shouldn't have spinned the chamber or pulled the trigger more than just once? What if I was mentally ill and thought that if I did that, it would not kill you, but bring about Ancapistan into existence? And soon we're going to live in a world where self-driving cars will be near perfected. Are we to ban manual driving cars? The other problem David points out is this. Say that I have a death laser, and this laser can shoot photons at such a powerful degree.
Okay, I think that's a good breakpoint before we go into the laser example. So let me rant for a minute, because I'm going to agree with you on threats. And this is something that started bothering me a year and a half ago. Most people, when they talk about the non-aggression principle, they include threats. Don't threaten or initiate force. And so what I started trying to like really break down the non-aggression principle and try and, again, prove it from first principles and work through... Huh?
Someone said, "Hail Mephi."
What's that mean?
Mephi's my cat.
Oh, okay.
I was picking pet my... Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I was really trying to break down and dissect the non-aggression principle, and and really try and back up every word of what most people consider to be the non-aggression principle. First of all, like a lot of people say, don't initiate force. That's the NAP. I think that's like the bumper sticker headline of what the non-aggression principle means. You have to define all of the terms used to really build up what the NAP is in explicit terms. But I don't think that if we are going to use the non-aggression principle in a universalizable way, I don't think we can include threats in that definition. And that is an uncomfortable position that I don't like, but that I hold through because I can't defeat it yet, and I haven't found anybody to be able to defeat that yet. I don't think you can universalize a threat. Threats are necessarily subjective because what is a threat? A threat is like a communication of damage to property. If like a contingent on something, like I'm going to, maybe not even contingent. It's just like communicating that you intend to damage property or that you're planning on damaging property. Communication is hopelessly subjective. Like when we talk about universalizable in terms of the non-aggression principle, and we say words like can be used by all beings in the entire universe at all times and places, we're talking about aliens. We're talking about ancient Mesopotamians. We're talking about people that, won't exist for 10,000 more years. Oh. Like you can't, so you can universalize the non-aggression principle across all of these things. But you cannot universalize a threat across all of these things because communication is subjective. What I mean by that is pointing a gun at somebody would mean literally nothing to an ancient Mesopotamian. It would mean a very clear and dangerous threat to somebody existing today, but even today it would mean literally nothing to an alien observing that interaction, because the communication of that threat is based on modern conceptions of, dangerous objects. It's based on what communication is. Maybe there's a society that could exist today where pointing guns is something you do to your friends, the actual pulling the trigger of the gun is the actual dangerous part. I don't know how many times I've told a friend, like, I'm going to punch you in the face. You're right. And I was not meaning it at all. It was just I'm going to punch you in the face right now. Like, just joking around. There was a YouTube video I did with my old co-host Ryan where we did this gag because this had literally happened. There was one of the businesses I started and I was in my office and people this was back during Pokemon Go. They would literally walk into my office, head down on their cell phone hunting goddamn Pokemons, and like it just irritated the shit out of me. And so I did this meme where I got consent beforehand and we planned it and I cleared my gun and I let him verify that my gun was clear, and then I took a picture of myself being like, I'm hunting Pokemon hunters, and it was a hilarious meme. But like if a third party had walked in on that and saw me pointing a gun at him, I'm threatening that person using all contemporary, that's not even like a weird edge case of aliens in 10,000 years in the future. That's a contemporary, plausible situation. So until I think your threat has to be plausible. I think that's at least what they would say. But again, like universality would start to fall apart there. Yeah. So I agree. But I'm not stopping there. Got into that. I'm not saying that that's an acceptable conclusion. I'm saying that we still have work to do in this area. Can we come up with a universalizable definition of threat? Because that's kind of important. Like otherwise the NAP becomes sort of purely restitutive, meaning after the damage has already been done, we can use the NAP to determine who was the bad guy in the situation. But like preemptive self-defense suddenly moves outside of the non-aggression principle. I'm unhappy with that conclusion, and I'm still going to continue working to find an answer. I think we as people that are aware of and interested in philosophy and these ideas need to, be working on these holes and acknowledge them when we find them. Like a lot of people bring this threat up as a problem, and then other people just dismiss it and ignore it because they don't want to wrestle with the problems that we have. Like, we have not achieved utopia. We still have problems that we need to work on, and I'm going to agree with you that this is one of them. Do you have anything that you'd like to say on it? That's right. You actually said it better than I did. but then again, I'm kind of ripping off David Friedman. So, that was his argument. I give him credit for it. So it's not that like I'm stealing his IP or anything. I'm just kidding. They're taking credit. Was David for IP? I don't know if David was for IP. No. Not that I know of, no. I mean, he gives his book away for free, so. Right. So SL asks, Patrick, if Antifa thugs make an explicit threat to me, such as tomorrow at 4 p.m., we're going to your house to murder you, then I'm still not justified to use physical force to defend myself. You should consider it credible if it seems credible. So what's the question? Like, the moment they step foot on your property, They're trespassing.
Yeah.
You can defend yourself. But they've violated the NAP the moment they step foot on your property. As long as they stay off your property, you're fine. The gray area comes in if they're standing off your property and point a gun at you. That's when we have a problem with the threat being part of the non-aggression principle.
So I remember there was it was today. A friend showed me like a clip of Rothbard, and he was talking about free speech, and he was talking about free speech absolutism and his problem with it. And he talks about conspiracy, and how and his idea was that conspiracy is just a group of people coming together. I mean, like from the legal standpoint, right? The laws against conspiracy when they charge you as conspiracy. And he was saying that look, it's just a bunch of people in a room talking. How are you going to criminalize a bunch of people talking? They can all get together and plan a bank robbery and never do it. But that's not conspiracy. What conspiracy is when you make that plan and you say, okay, we're going to do this and we're going to grab this. I'm going to buy a truck and you're going to do this and we're going to do this. All right, got it, go. And then I go out and get that truck. Mm-hmm. That's when it's going, okay, now this is conspiracy. It wasn't conspiracy before. It was conspiracy in the legal sense. Remember? Yep. It's consent. Now it's actually conspiracy in the legal sense, where we're going to say, okay, now you're actually making progress towards that goal, which is a crime. Yeah. So in conspiracy in that sense, I guess threats in that sense, we're like, okay, now you're actually doing the thing. You're actually engaging in the things that you're going to do. That's when you're breaking the non-aggression principle. Yeah.
So if you ask me, am I going to defend myself from a clear and present threat? Absolutely. I'm saying that this is a hole in our. I hate using collectives. I see threats as a problem in the philosophy. If anybody out there has information or has done reading or has ideas on this, please contact me. Let me know. I really want to learn in this area.
And I would watch it. This is again, I just want to state this again for people who just walked in. I want the NAP to be true. That'd be a whole lot easier for me to just walk around and know everything, what's good and bad. But I'm just not at that. I'm just not convinced. Yeah. That explaining why I'm not convinced. Yeah.
Mark says, quote, "A NAP violation is first initiated coercion by a human or property they control." Coercion is a very subjective word. The Antifa feel they're being coerced when people call them nasty names. We
or
have
misgender them.
We have to be extremely clear with our language and our definitions, and make sure that it's all universalizable. It's not easy work, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. What do they call it when you misgender people? What's the word they use?
It's not dead naming, but that's kind of the same thing.
Well, it's called dead naming, but what do they call that? Why do they have a problem with it? There's a word that they use. It starts with an M. Micro
hate speech is violence. Oh, microaggressions. Yeah.
Microaggression. Why are you aggressing against them? You should call them Zirgurgis, whatever there is. Anyways, go ahead.
Okay, so you brought up threats in this video. I wanted to give my spiel on threats because I want to do work in this area, and I think you're right.
Phobes got it right.
I want to say also the next thing you said is about talking about intent. I would say that intent cannot matter for determining the ethics of a situation or for applying the non-aggression principle. Because intent is unknowable, subjective, messy. It's not universalizable. Intent cannot turn an aggression into a non-aggression. If a crazy person intends to hurt you by shooting you, it doesn't mean that they haven't damaged you by shooting you. So I don't think we disagree in that area. I don't think it's a problem with the non-aggression principle. I just don't include intent into the non-aggression principle. What do you?
But I will say that I say that intent matters insofar as determining your punishment for the crime. So if your intent was to kill me and you killed me, then you should probably be in more trouble than someone who just accidentally kills me, in a case of manslaughter or something like that. Right.
Yeah. So if it's a restitutive justice system,
right. That's where intent matters, but not in the ethics of it. You shouldn't have done that at all.
We agree. Yeah. We even if you had the best intentions. But aren't you talking as an anti-consequentialist by saying that? If you have the best intentions and you cause harm, you just said that you should be culpable for that. That's the opposite of consequentialism, which is what I think you called yourself, right?
No. What I'm saying is in matter of law, right? If you're going to punish people and have people pay restitution, then your intent does matter. If your intention was to murder someone and you murdered someone, like you didn't like them and you wanted them dead, and you went out and did the process of murdering them, and now they're dead, then yeah, you should probably pay more in restitution or criminal penalties or whatever the rules say that you have in your area. Yeah, you should, then you should be in more trouble than someone who just like, I don't know. I can't think of it, like an example. Like you just dropped something off of a balcony and it killed someone, and you're like, "Oh, that's a mistake." So
But then earlier you said, you just said that, you know, but for ethics it doesn't matter. For ethics, intent doesn't matter.
No, for ethics in the non-aggression principle, it doesn't matter.
Okay, and so my question was, how is that consequentialist?
You're talking about the non-aggression principle. They're deontological rules. You should follow them no matter what. Doesn't matter in all circumstances. It's universalizable. Right. Yeah.
So you're saying so intent shouldn't matter.
Yeah, you shouldn't have knocked over that thing accidentally. You should not have done that. You ought not have done that.
So we agree on that,
regardless of consequence. Yeah.
I guess what am I missing?
No, that's what I'm saying that the non-aggression principle is.
Okay. Well, we agree there. Okay. Okay. Joe Axe says we call them antifers. There you go. All right.
That it can burn a house down in 1 second flat. Would it be okay for me to shoot it at your house? No? Well, what if I dialed it down to it only took 10 minutes to burn down your house? Would that be okay? No? What about less than that and it took 10 hours? What about if it took 10 days? 10 years? What if it was strong enough to only beam the same amount of light photons as a candle and couldn't cause any physical damage whatsoever to your house, even in 1,000,000 years? Oh, that's okay? Well, congratulations, you reject the non-aggression principle on consequentialist grounds. Because you are no longer interested in the moral prohibitions on the violations of property, you only reject them if the consequences are damaging.
This is like conflating a property system with the non-aggression principle. Like Walter Block had a good answer to this exact question. I don't know if you've heard him talk on this, but he basically said, like, if you built your house and no one was... Stephen Mulvey, thank you for the 5. I appreciate it.
So I'm behind everyone. I just want to say that I agree with Patrick that murder is good cannot be universal.
All right, thank you, Stephen. I appreciate it. Yeah, what was I saying? Oh, so if you homesteaded your property, if you homesteaded your property and no one was firing photons or porch lights or sounds from a party onto that property, nobody had moved in next door already doing that, then you homesteaded that property in its condition. You homesteaded your body in the condition that there is carbon dioxide in the air. And so when you encounter carbon dioxide, you don't have an expectation that there won't be carbon dioxide in the air. If you homesteaded the house sans laser light, then you do sort of have the property in that state sans laser light. And if somebody moves in next door and then starts shooting lasers at your property, that is a non-aggression principle. That is a property violation. Now, if you homesteaded, like if you decided to homestead a piece of property next to a party house or next to a laser light show stage, whatever, that frequently has, like laser lights shining on this property, and you homesteaded it in that condition, then you don't have a claim to say, don't shine laser light onto my house. And if one day they like turn up the power of their laser to the degree where, it's substantially damaging or different than the fashion in which, or the state in which you homesteaded your property, now we have an aggression. Now we have a problem because someone else has, affected your property in a way that you didn't homestead it. Walter Block's example had to do with people flying planes above your house. If you homestead property under a common flight path, then it's not like you can instantly start claiming that people that have been flying that flight path every day for years are sort of trespassing or something. In fact,
I think under.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So under current law right now, if you buy a piece of real estate, right, you basically own, from the center of the earth all the way up to your property lines and then all the way out into the atmosphere. That's the law right now. Mm-hmm. That would not apply in the real world. What would happen, or in Ancapistan, right? What would happen in Ancapistan is if like you homesteaded something, basically it's fair game above your house and over, because you haven't homesteaded the air above it. You haven't homesteaded the the molten iron that's underneath your house. You just don't own that stuff. Kind of like the same way you don't own stuff. So that's all fine.
Agreed.
The issue is like, okay, so I have a thing that I homesteaded, right? I homesteaded my land. I have, a little electric light show out in my backyard, harmless lasers. There's no way that I can rig those lasers to be deadly. I got a couple of porch lights and stuff, and that kind of shines over into the property over next door. Family moves in, starts building a house, homesteading the house, and they're like, oh yeah, they have those lights, that's fine, whatever. But if I install another light, do I have access to shine those photons into them? Are we going to count photons? Like we say, well, those photons were already here when we got there. But these new photons that you released today, those are completely different photons.
Well, photons are photons, right? You're sending photons. Like, in a way, like the photoning of a piece of property would, sort of be an argument to have made first use of the property. Look, I've been shining photons on that property for 20 years, and now you move in? Like, shouldn't you get my permission to homestead the property I've been photoning for 20 years? Like, I think it works the other way. I don't think it's a problem with the NAP. I think it's like no society this is an island versus the city thing. Like, this is the way the NAP works. It's rough around the edges. It's kind of shitty, but like it's clear at least. It's objective and clear and can resolve disputes. But I wouldn't want to live in a group of people that enforced it that way. I would want a more reasonable group of people to live with. It's like. Anyway, it's like the island versus the city again, is what I'm saying.
Right. But what's the main reason why you would want those exceptions, though?
What exceptions?
To allowing photons and stuff. Come here, what are you doing?
I could make that choice voluntarily if I wanted to live in a city, because necessarily when you live next to other people, you get a bunch of benefits of a bunch of infrastructure and, cheap groceries and prolific jobs. But you also live next to other people that, have these pesky goddamn photons firing off everywhere. So like,
there's the reasons you're citing. There's a bundle that you can put all of those things into, and there's a word for it, and it starts with a C. What is that word?
Clinton?
No. You're willing to make exceptions for breaking kind of certain property norms and this kind of purely
on a voluntary, consensual basis. Yes.
Right, but for consequentialist reasons. So, like, I mean, I didn't agree that you can install that property light. I didn't sign any papers, as Spooner would say. I didn't sign shit. And you're just now firing these photons in your house. If I wanted to be a dick, I could be like, dude, no, I didn't agree to that light. It's shining into my window. It's keeping me up at night.
Yep.
You can make a case for that, but you could say like,
I'm not arguing against it. I'm saying it is.
Yeah.
Saying it is a NAP violation, and no one would want to live in a society like that. But that's not a flaw in the NAP. That's just something that you need to have voluntary agreements with people over. And in fact, having these explicit voluntary agreements with people resolves all these disputes before they even become a problem. Like you get to know the people you live with.
So we're moved past the ethics of it, and we're talking about the legal application of it, right? So we're talking about the kind of consequentialist aspects of the legal system in it. So we're saying that, like, there should be exceptions into this purely NAP kind of legal order, and say, you know what, him shining a light, and it's keeping you up at night. That sounds like more of a personal problem, Buy him a curtain. At most, like, come on, like, what are you doing? So I think it's a good idea to say, like, hey, there should be exceptions to these rules, and just make them a rule of thumb. If we can just look at the consequences of this action and say, okay, so the consequences of him installing a porch light where it's not even visible really, through your window, you have to like peek your head out around the corner in order to see it from your bedroom. It doesn't keep you up at night. It doesn't bother you while you're watching TV. It doesn't bother you while you're recording because you have blockades over your window because you turned it into a sound room, whatever. Like, we can say, like, there's no consequences that are coming from this. There's no real property violations going on here. We're going to look at the consequences of what you did rather than, the legal aspect of what you did from a purely kind of like NAP framework, right? So I think the NAP is where we're getting the idea from, where we're kind of basing our law from, but we have to take into consideration consequences.
Yeah, I guess just to restate, I'm saying that this is not a flaw in the non-aggression principle because, like, if on the island, absent a society with voluntary agreements between people to handle
have a good one,
edge cases like this, you could just say, look, if you want to shoot lasers off your property, you need to buy more property so that you don't, affect the unowned property around you that may one day be homesteaded. But again, like I said, just referencing Block's answer to that as far as homesteading and accepting the property in the state it is when you homestead it is part of that. But yeah, no, in society, like when we're talking legal systems and dispute resolution, there's nothing wrong with like consequential, like proving damages is another way of saying what you're saying. Like, look, we live in a polite society and you start firing especially strong lasers onto my property and I sue you. And then, the judge says, okay, well, he's definitely doing that. And I'm like, what's your damages? Oh, well, it's a minor annoyance for, 5 minutes once a week or something like that. Well, let's try and quantify that. You know what I mean? Like that, these are all, in practice, these are all practical problems that get resolved in disputes if they're not covered by the voluntary agreements. Like, I'm saying that, excuse me, I guess I should say it the other way. I'm not saying that the non-aggression principle should be like the only law on the law books. Like you open the law book and you're like, non-aggression principle. While some people could choose to live like that,
from it, right?
Like,
or laws that are derived from the non-aggression principle more.
I'm saying that I would not want to live in a society that you open the law book and it's got one page in it that says the non-aggression principle. I would not want to live there.
Or laws solely based on the non-aggression principle in that kind of narrow framework. Like, so they're saying like, yeah, the non-aggression principle is a law of the land, and here are the specifics, right?
I don't think I would want to live in that, like, because like another edge case that I covered in a YouTube video on my channel was doorbell bombs. Like, from a non-aggression principle standpoint, you own the property, you own your door, you own your doorbell. What's to stop you from fashioning a bomb and installing it into your doorbell such that when somebody walked on your property and rang your doorbell, it blows them up? If it's your property, you absolutely have the right to build a door, build a bomb, build a doorbell. And if somebody trespasses on your property and hits the button and they blow up, well, they were trespassing and they didn't have the right to do that. That's an on the island scenario. Would I ever want to live in a society where doorbell bombs were a thing? Hell no. Of course not.
No. Right. Okay.
That's insane and absurd and crazy. But if that was a place, let's say there was a city that organized and said, look, we only want one law on the books and it says the non-aggression principle. And what would happen is the first time somebody visited that city and rang a doorbell and got blown up, the entire world would hear about it. They would stop visiting that city. The city would probably, starve to death because people would ostracize them. And, the shit would kind of work itself out. But I'm saying that this is not a flaw in the non-aggression principle, because if you had to, it could resolve the disputes of doorbell bombs and photons. But I think, we like more, because the shit like, it's kind of it's a subjective common thing to understand that I am not going to be charged with trespassing if I walk up to my neighbor's front door and ring their doorbell. Like, right. But that's a subjective thing. That's not a universalizable thing. So that has to become...
It's like a threat thing, yeah.
Yeah, it's a threat thing. That has to come on top of, that has to come from voluntary agreements between people. Whew.
Okay.
All right.
But again, I think, yeah. So the point that I'm making is that there's a lot of libertarians. Rothbard would be included. Block has made a lot of deviations. Like, he has talked about how, even though they call him, what do they call Block? They basically just call him the new Rothbard. But he disagrees on Rothbard on a lot of things.
He does, yeah.
I think he actually, I'm not sure. I think he actually disagrees with argumentation ethics. Don't quote me on that. I don't know. But I know that he, even though that was Hoppe, yeah. But Rothbard ended up taking it on and adopting it.
I've had him on the channel twice, and the first time I got him to admit to a change in his position on evictionism, which I thought was pretty huge.
Oh, good.
So evictionism outside of rape would be a violation of the non-aggression principle. So rape is the only case in which it would be warranted, but it would still be murder, with the murder sort of falling on the rapist instead of the
So you're fixing UPB.
What am I doing? What?
So you're fixing UPB then?
What do you mean? No, I'm curious. What do you mean?
you're stopping rape babies. That was a joke. Anyways, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just throwing that out there. It's not widely known. A lot of people that follow evictionism, it's not like he wrote a next book after he appeared on my show and was like, oh, here's some changes to evictionism. That didn't happen, but it did happen. So anyway.
Yeah. But I know that he also disagrees with Rothbard on child and the NAP and too, because he did a debate with Molyneux talking about spanking, and he was pro spanking.
Block did a debate with Molyneux?
Yeah, about spanking, and he agreed. He said that spanking was good, and I was like,
uh-oh.
Or not the speaking that was good. He was saying that, like, oh yeah, I'm sure Molyneux's all of his, his arguments for how it's detrimental. He's showing the science. I don't agree with. I agree with all that stuff. I'm sure you did your homework and you probably know more about it than I do. He's like, but I'm just saying that it's purely libertarian to spank your kids.
Well, I'm definitely gonna search for that.
Yeah.
All right, hit
but Molyneux ended up conceding that debate. That was weird. But
I've never seen Molyneux concede a debate, so I've definitely got to find this video now.
Why should it stop at photons? Is the violation of property rights the same if I burn 1,000 tires in my backyard covering your house in soot and smoke, or just a little bit of smoke and soot from my cigar as it wafts into your property from my front porch? Again, consequences don't matter, and I ought not smoke if that smoke would enter your property without your predetermined expressed agreement. In fact, breathing would be a violation of everyone's non-aggression principle, as CO2 is a pollutant that no one agreed it was okay for me to release these gases, even if the effects were negligible at worst. Having lights visible from your property, driving cars, even breathing would be immoral in a purely deontological non-aggression principle ethical framework, and the amount of legal wrangling to allow all of these actions legally would make it impossible. 2. It doesn't prohibit shitty things most libertarians would find objectionable. Not all libertarians...
I mean, I'll wait till he gets back, but yeah, I'll wait till he gets back. Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me. All right, well, I'll wait.
Libertarians think the NAP is the only thing to consider when looking at morality and the ethics of actions. Yeah. The ones who don't, good on you. There's lots of shitty things that people do that aren't violations of the non-aggression principle. Remember when that really creepy dude was doxing Stefan Molyneux's fans, and Molyneux used that to not only file a bogus DMCA claim against him, but also a critic who wasn't doxing anyone at all? Why did he do that? The reason I ask is because doxing people is not a violation of the non-aggression principle. I did a video about this years ago, and I'll link that in the description.
Stealing Fire says, so Rothbard thinks it's okay to let your kids starve, and Block thinks it's okay to assault them to modify behavior. I'm surprised as anarchists they model their family lives like dictatorships. Yeah, I would disagree with both of them. I know that Rothbard holds that position, or held that position. I'm just learning now from Jim that Block holds that position. So yeah, I would disagree with both of those.
He thinks he's libertarian, yeah, I think he actually gave examples. It's been a while since I watched it.
So far, your video is just covering shit we literally just talked about, so I'm just going to keep playing.
Okay.
Posting information is not a violation, just like sharing ideas is not a violation, unless that information is being shared, is also attached with a message calling for actions, like, here's where the guy lives, go and kill him. It's not even the information that's being shared that's the problem.
Hey, Mr. Dapperton, welcome to the stream. The last thing I was going to say in this video was that you have an open invitation to come on if anything we talked about your section of the video. If you'd like to say anything, I'd love to have you on, and we can continue the conversation.
That wasn't Dapperton. Oh, that was Shane Killian. Yeah.
Oh, killing.
Yeah, they're different people.
Oh, I'm terrible at this internet drama shit. Sorry. I just don't involve myself. There's so much like YouTube catty garbage that goes on. I'm just here to live life and do philosophy. So.
It's the cult of violence that is the problem and would violate the NAP with or without the docs included. You also don't own the numbers and letters that make up your identifiable information. Also, there's examples where doxing people is a good thing, like doxing someone who's committing some kind of crime with victims to agencies who can stop them from doing those actions. How about revenge porn? Remember all those dick pics you sent your lady friend who's now mad at you and she's going around sharing your private sexy pics online to shame you? Guess what? Ain't nothing wrong with that under the non-aggression principle. You gave those photos out to people. They can do with them as they please, unless, you believe in copyright. How about exposing yourself to children? How about letting your kids starve to death? How about not telling your mom you love her when you do? Not pointing any fingers, Vault. Part 3.
The Vault. Not pointing any fingers, Vault.
We kind of already talked about most of that. I would just say that private property solves most of those problems. If there aren't public spaces, then a lot of these issues get resolved by the rules of the property owner. But yeah, we already kind of talked about most of that. So I'm good to move on if you are.
Yep. But I will say that Volt does need to tell his mom he loves her.
Okay, I don't know this person, but I'll agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just disagree.
I agree.
Volt, tell your mom you love her.
Do that.
Horrible person.
It's a spook. No, really, that's it. Next slide. Oh, put the next slide up. Fine, I'll expound. Things like religion, moral rules, political concepts, and even economic theories don't exist in the real world.
No, we didn't.
Even when they are practiced.
Not completely.
They are phantasms of the mind, a spook, if you will. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad for people to do. Quite the contrary. In many cases, property norms have a measurable benefit to society, but they don't.
What'd you say?
I said, "Hail Satan."
Oh, okay.
Don't exist out of people's minds who accept them. If you get on best living with or associating with people who do hold to these ideas, great, go do that. But to claim that these moral systems exist anywhere outside of your head is silly. And as I've shown earlier, the NAP is very flawed, and that no libertarian would support it if they understood what it allowed for and what it prohibits. Okay, Jim, then what's your solution? Well, I'm glad you asked. Consider consequence.
I mean, did you have anything? I felt like we already kind of talked about that. Like, rights are mutual understandings between people, not something that exists sort of outside of the human.
Yeah, it's not tangible. Yeah.
Yeah,
they're
so
phantasms that are in people's heads. But
for rights to have any effect on the world, they have to exist in people's minds, and people have to choose to behave accordingly. That's literally how it works. Like, I'm just describing reality. I'm not trying to make some deep philosophical statement. Like, for a concept to affect the world, because it's just a concept, it literally has to be in someone's mind, and then they have to choose to behave according to that concept. And that goes for rights. That goes for everything else. I feel like I'm just stating, like, this is how it works. This is how reality works. This is how it works. I don't know.
And look, I mean, not even theoretically we can't find an unmarried bachelor. Not even theoretically can we find one. But again, like the concept of a bachelor to begin with doesn't exist outside of anyone's head, right?
Right.
Like, just a designation. We all agree, like, that person's a bachelor because he doesn't have a wife, and this person isn't a bachelor because he does have a wife. Okay.
Same with all language, all words. Yeah.
And so I felt it was kind of important to kind of bring that up, because there's a lot of libertarians who think that, like, oh no, this is something that's objectively true, and it can't ever be broken. And if you break it, you're the worst person ever. Mm-hmm. And there's no other kind of thing that we can judge things according. And like, I'll see videos. Well, I don't really see it anymore. It's all kind of gone away. But I remember back in the day in YouTube, like, libertarians would make video after video after video after video. I got a cat trying to get my attention. She's doing a good job. Talking about, like, is this a violation of the non-aggression principle? Is this a violation of the non-aggression principle? And which is fine. Like, dude, those conversations, I guess, should be had if that's the premise that you accept. However, then they would conclude, therefore, it's okay to do. And it's like, right. No. I mean, there's other things that we can kind of judge actions by and say, like, yeah, this is not a good thing. You should not do that thing, even though it doesn't violate the
doorbell bombs are a great example. Like, I mean, technically allowable under the net because it's your property and you can do what you want with it. But do you want to live in a city where doorbell bombs are a thing?
No.
Like, hell no.
Well, I wouldn't mind. I just wouldn't go in anyone's house.
Yeah.
Or knock.
You get on the internet or something. Knock. Yeah.
Just knock.
Again, David's book is a great primer on why a stateless libertarian social order would be optimal without all these bizarre and infeasible ethical spooks that just make you sound like an autistic person when you try to bring them up.
Play it, please.
Not an argument.
Sure, it's a shitty thing to levy taxes or take and damage people's stuff, kill people, boss people around, have central banks, ban fun things, bomb people, toss flashbangs in babies' cribs, and all kinds of stuff like that. But these philosophical parlor tricks don't even hold up against scrutiny from some libertarian podcaster and Twitter shitposter. This should give you pause. Anyways, I will talk to you guys later.
Not an argument.
All right. So yeah,
Well, wait. What is not the argument? Saying that something doesn't even hold up because of some idiot?
just saying something doesn't hold up doesn't mean that it doesn't hold up. It's just like you saying it doesn't hold up.
If I demonstrated a case, I think it's fair to say. I mean, it doesn't have to be. Not everything has to be presented as an argument. To be fair.
Yeah, but I got to use the fucking meme. Come on, that's a great meme.
Yeah. No. By any chance,
Don't take it personally.
I'm all for it.
Sorry. Yeah, don't take it personally.
I'm not taking it personally. I'm just saying.
I've never gotten to use that button before, so
Technically, it doesn't have to be an argument. It's not an argument.
I feel like you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like the non-aggression principle is like a very rare special thing that, like, what other universalizable rules are there in existence that, if held by everyone at all times, could reduce conflict to zero, even if some of the edge cases of that, conflict reduction are uncomfortable or messy. Like, it doesn't mean that the NAP is flawed. It doesn't mean that, like, it's worthless. You said this at the beginning, though. You said it wasn't worthless. You said that it did have some use and some promise.
I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I'm saying that it's a good. The way I kind of look at the non-aggression principle is more like, all right, so there's this new thing, right? Let's say there's this new technology, like Bitcoin, right? There's this new technology in Bitcoin, and we know that it's possible for someone to, through various different means, get a hold of someone else's wallet. Be it through rubber hose hacking, which I was surprised that you even knew what that was when I first brought it up to you. I was like, holy crap, someone actually knew what that was.
I'm in IT.
Through rubber hose hacking. Which, by the way, if you don't know, rubber hose hacking is when I come over to your house and say, give me your password while I'm beating you or choking you with a rubber hose. Right?
Doesn't matter how strong your encryption is.
Yep.
When you're getting hit with a hose.
Yeah. Or, I hack your computer, or I, trick you into doing something or whatever. Okay, so this is this new technology. How does a non-aggression principle apply? Well, we can do this, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this is how this would apply. Okay, we can do it in this particular aspect. Okay, that's great. But I also think you should go, now, is there other things that we should consider? Basically consequences, or just kind of maybe intuitional, kind of like, what does this seem wrong to do? What are you doing?
I think it's like, you need to treat people you've never met before according to the non-aggression principle, but then most people in a civilized city are going to want to build agreements on top of that to soften the edges to make life more comfortable. Like, if I was on an island and there was one other dude on the island with me and I'd never met them and I didn't know them and I couldn't communicate with them, then I would begin the relationship by respecting, the non-aggression principle as much as possible, to the greatest extent possible. I wouldn't assume that he didn't have doorbell bombs. But like, if I'm evaluating places to live, I'm going to look for places that definitely soften some of those edges, because, I want to go bring my neighbor's cookies without fear of, being afraid for my life or whatever.
Promethium Oxide's comment was just beautiful.
What? I missed it. What was it?
The nap is my wife's boyfriend. By the way, this guy single-handedly has been the biggest thorn in my side when it comes to my position on the non-aggression principle. He's always trying to argue it with me.
Okay. I mean, so are we in agreement there with that kind of conclusion, or do you disagree? Like,
yeah,
let me push a little bit more. So, like, when you say you're a consequentialist, that tells me, and so maybe this isn't your position, but that tells me that the ends justify the means for you. That means that if you have that means that to you, intent modifies ethics. That means if you are trying to achieve an outcome which you decide is good or preferred, that the way you achieve that outcome doesn't affect the ethics.
Well, okay, so we're talking about law, or we're talking about ethics? Because again, like we've kind of talked about
I don't care about law.
Things.
I'm all about the morality, the ethics.
So there's certain things that, for the most part, most people agree with. Like, we kind of don't like the idea of murder. We kind of don't like the idea of rape, at least in modern society now. We don't like the idea of theft. We don't like the ideas, there's just common things, right? So if we want these things, there has to be some sort of rules against these, some sort of like moral prohibitions or ethical prohibitions on these things. And what should they be to achieve, basically the most people's kind of happiness in a given area? I mean, of course, some people would be like, oh no, stoning gays are perfectly okay, and it's like, yeah, I don't know about that. At least not in my backyard, right? So we can mostly agree with at least most of the major key issues. And in order to achieve like those kind of goals, like here's how we should go about these things. If we want to make a ham sandwich, we have to do these certain rules. Like, and if we want to have a peaceful society, we have to have these sort of rules. It doesn't break Hume's law, because we're not saying these are right and wrong actions. These are unjustified or unjustified actions, or we're not saying that you ought not do these things. We're just saying, like, if you don't want X, then don't do Y. So that's pretty much what the difference is. And of course, for the most part, except for those very weird, very cases like CPR, smoking on my front porch, shining a light into my neighbor's house because they're being a jerk or whatever, as long as it doesn't catch your house on fire, I think those are perfectly fine actions to do, because we're balancing the consequences against, things that and again, like, I don't think anyone's like unless you're talking about like utilitarians, we're not talking about everything. Like, we only determine things according to, to outcomes. Of course, no, we have kind of, things that we all say, like, all right, we like these things. We like wealth. We like property. We like safety.
Let me push
stuff.
back. You've like fallen into using a shitload of collective we's. Like, you're just saying we over and over. Like, I don't know what that means. Who's we, and what are they deciding and how are they deciding, and by what standard are they deciding that something is worthy of whatever?
So,
I don't know.
So I like particular things, and I know there's a lot of other people who like those particular things as well. And those people are probably going to move, including me, to an area where they're going to set out, these are the rules of this apartment complex or this covenant community. Or we're going to agree to subscribe to this polycentric legal order system. Like, we're going to assign to this company. And that's how things are probably going to arrange itself. And David D. Freeman wrote a great book, and I referenced it in this video, Machinery Freedom. And he kind of goes over a lot of the finer aspects of this and talks about like how consequentialism would apply.
So I'm not disagreeing that people can organize, with whatever rules they want. They could organize a community of people that agree that, murder is, I guess, acceptable, whatever. But
murder land, rape land.
So the question comes in, like, you've organized this community, and then you decide to make a new rule because you've got some new idea in mind that you think would be good, and one of the people in the community, disagrees or doesn't consent to that change. Like, what do you do to that person? Do you force them to go along? Because if you live in a covenant community, you're kind of bound by certain rules, right? If you live in a homeowners association, you're bound by certain rules, and they can change those rules, and you have a say in those rules, right? But the difference is we have. Yeah, but my homeowners association can't make a rule tomorrow that says, every year we get to pick one person in the community one person in the community to murder, like. Right, but
the state can.
Like, let me phrase that more explicitly. Like, there is a structure in place in my homeowners association that allows them to vote to change the rules and to create new rules. And so if next week they voted to create a rule that says once a year they get to murder one member of the community, that like, we have the ability to withdraw our consent. Right. And, that would certainly be a situation in which I would withdraw from my consent to participate in that HOA.
Okay, so
what would your consequentialists do with that?
Well, we just look at the way kind of legal orders are constructed. I mean, even I don't even think Rothbard or Hoppe or Block would even disagree with this, and they're purely strict on this. And they would say, like, look, you can sign a contract, and the contract can stipulate that the rules can change at any time. Mm-hmm. However, I think that the big difference is if I live in like an apartment complex or a covenant community, and they make a rule that I don't agree with, even if it's egregious, like we're going to shoot one of the people in there, which would be not very advantageous for them because they would be losing customers. But if they decide to do that, I can move. And it's a reasonable request for me to move, say, down the street or a mile away versus the entire state of Nevada, or even worse, the entire U.S. country. Which is why decentralization is important. But again, like, you're going to end up having rules no matter where you go. Or if you don't...
Sorry, go ahead.
Or you can just go homestead a piece of land in the middle of nowhere and not have to agree to any part of rules, or even create your own covenant community.
So, straight out of Block's mouth, and I absolutely agree with him on this, is that, like, if you sign a contract that has a penalty clause in it, and you violate the contract, then you have agreed to that penalty. So if the HOA had a penalty clause in it that said if you ever withdraw your consent to this contract, you got to move out of the neighborhood, then no harm, no foul. If it didn't have that clause in it, though, then you can, end your association with the contract anytime you want, and they wouldn't be able to force you to leave. So do we agree at least that far?
Yeah. That's poor contract writing. That's not your fault. That's their fault.
But
you can actually go out and look for bad contracts and be like, oh, look, there's a loophole in this. I can get away around with this and sign up, and then they'd have no way of getting around it unless it had stipulated in there, like, okay, we can change the terms of his agreement.
Right, but the underlying ethic that governs the transaction that we just talked ourselves through is the non-aggression principle. Like, if it wasn't in your contract that I have to leave and you use force to make me leave, that is a deontological application of the NAP, not a consequentialist, justification based on...
I don't want to die.
What do you mean?
I'm looking more on the consequences. It's like, well, the NAP, whatever, but I'm more interested in not dying. I'm looking at the consequences of this action. I'm going like, this sucks. This could be me. I mean, it could very well not be me. I could theoretically win the lottery every time and not die.
Describe what that means for our homeowners association contract. I don't see the association.
Okay, so you signed a contract, right? And in your contract, it stipulates that, there's a penalty clause for you leaving, and there's rules saying that, these rules can change at any time, that you have a right to have a say in these monthly meetings, yearly meetings, however they do them. And if you don't agree to them, you have to pay this penalty thing and you have to move, right? But those are something that you agree to at the very beginning. This is basic contractual law. Yep. However, how this would be chosen would be people would be voluntarily signing these contracts, and they would be participating in polycentral legal orders that prefer those things. And again, I'm not against the non-aggression principle as like a rule of thumb. I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. What I am saying is that basing all of your laws and all polycentral legal order systems all have to follow this law, which Block has said recently. I've seen a live stream with him on a channel called Nate the Voluntarist, and he was saying like, look, like, no, like that's the law of the land, is the non-aggression principle, full stop. And it's like, well, you know what, maybe I want to live in an area where there, for whatever reasons, maybe I'm conservative and I want to have conservative rules. I don't want, a pride parade going down my street or something, or maybe I do want a pride parade street and I'm upset that there's a bunch of conservatives. I don't want to live in an area with a bunch of conservatives. Like, you can go and move to an area that's going to be more catered to those kinds of sensibilities.
I feel like we're talking around the issue I'm trying to point us at. So I'm talking about consequentialism in and of itself. Like, to me, that says that, your ends justify your means. Like, if you decide that an end is worthy, that you will feel justified and morally fine with whatever means that you feel subjectively you need to achieve your subjective, valued end. Is that your position?
Yeah. Well, okay, sort of. Okay. So, I mean, like, there are things that I value, right? There's things that most people value. And one of those things is something like the non-aggression principle, not just full to the T, like a lot of people want it to be. And that's the part I disagree with it as.
No, but that's not my question. My question is how you justify your actions. Like, is your moral rule, if I pick an end that I think is worthy, that I'll do whatever, like I'm morally justified in doing whatever I feel I need to reach that end.
Okay, so if we're talking about my moral
to me, that
rules,
is consequential.
My personal moral rules. My personal moral rules is basically the tenets of Satanism, which is
I'm not familiar. I'm sorry.
Don't do harm to others. Was away from the super chat jam.
Mate, hope all is well. All the best. Peaceful, easy feeling.
Thank you, Peaceful Easy Feeling. My family is actually in a good place right now. We have a couple more weeks of easy going before we start kind of the next round. So thanks for asking. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the donation.
Which, by the way, I hope all is well. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, where was I? So yeah, so the idea of let people do what they want. If they bother you, or if the things that they do are harming you, then you can put a stop to it. If if someone slaps you across the face, punch them against theirs. Eye for an eye 1,000 times. The silver rule: do unto others as they do unto you. Those sorts of rules. Like those are my moral rules.
I guess,
and I want to.
Let me ask it another way, because we're still not talking.
My moral rules are different than my ethical kind of claims. Which my ethical claims are a little bit more on the nihilistic side. My consequentialism is more my libertarianism.
Like if I asked you, how should I behave? What rules should govern my behavior, Jim? What would you tell me?
You're asking me. You're asking me, right? I'm
actually asking you. Yeah. Like,
okay. So
tell me what rules I should use to govern my behavior.
There's a little book I should highly recommend you pick it up, because we were talking about it earlier. It's called The Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey, and I highly recommend you check out, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. And that's a good kind of book to live by.
For the sake of this discussion, can you give me like a TLDR rather than just saying you become a Satanist?
I just did. Just allow people. Don't interfere with people unless they're interfering with you. Eye for an eye for 1,000 times. But why? Silver rule: do unto others. Do unto others.
Why
shouldn't you? Well, I think it's a good way to live. You asked my opinion, and that's my answer.
So the rule is live in the way that you think is good.
So if you're
what's the rule?
No. No.
What's the rule?
So you're asking a Satanist like what he tells other people to do. I don't tell anybody what to do. That's not very satanic. If you're asking you
to order me, I'm asking you to tell me what rule should I use to determine what I should and shouldn't do.
And I told you there's a great book that you should check out, and it gives good reasons for it, and it gives.
So you don't want to talk about it, or?
No, I did. I just told you what those basic rules are. There's a little bit more to it, but that's basically it.
But why are those the rules?
Because I like those rules. I think they're beneficial for me.
So if we like a rule, then that's what we get to behave accordingly? Like liking something is enough?
So I don't think that there's any ethical rules that are objective. They're subjective.
Define objective in the way that you're using it.
So there is no one set of right way of doing things 100% ethically. However, there are things that we all kind of subjectively kind of agree upon, and we can find other people who have those same similar agreements, and we can form associations with them, be it friendships, be it covenant communities, be it networking, whatever. We can all kind of agree on certain things and kind of come together. And maybe we may disagree on little things here and there. For the most part, we can agree.
So
I think, like I said, I really do want something like the non-aggression principle to exist, where I can say this is an objective ethic, and we can all agree to it. It would make the world a lot better of a place. Fortunately, we don't have that ethical system.
Let me ask it one additional way, and then I'll give up for today.
Okay.
So let's say I decide, for whatever reason, I decide to behave in a way, towards you or your property that you don't like or don't consent to. What justification would you use for defending yourself against me?
Well, first of all, if I have a legal system that's in place, an anarchist legal system, or even the current status system, I guess I have to go through that loophole, or that stuff. I have to call the stupid police when I get robbed, and that sucks. And I don't want to deal with cops, but that's the rule. However, if I lived in anarchy land,
let's go to the island. Forget society and forget all that. Let's just go to the island. Like you have a hut that you've built in the island, and I come up and start fucking with your hut. What justification would you use to defend yourself?
I would destroy your hut.
That's not what I asked.
That is.
What is your justification for defending yourself against my attempt to knock your house over?
The subjective ethics that I found and I think are good, which is
just because you want to.
Right, because it's subjective.
Okay, so that's self-contradictory. Like if I walk up and say I want to knock over your house just because I want to, and you say, well, I don't want you to knock over my house just because I don't want you to. Then that's not ethics. That's not even an ethical system. That's just the state of nature. Right. That's two guys with clubs that are gonna be like, right. Well, I want to do this and I don't want you to do this. Boom, 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 boom. Like that's we have lowered ourselves back down to the animal kingdom. Like
Right, and that's why I'm insisting that someone either fix this thing or come up with a better one.
What is missing? Like, we have not, like today, every
Well,
single
the
time
objectivity,
that you pointed to a flaw in the NAP, I said, hopefully I showed that how it's not a flaw. It's just usually an uncomfortable outcome. What is not objective about the non-aggression principle? That's a good question. What is not objective about it?
Okay, so there's lots of we had lots of disagreements, right? But I don't necessarily feel compelled, or you didn't compel me to change my mind on any of them. So which particular one did you want to go after? Because there's a whole bunch of them.
Well, I like the last question I asked. What is not objective about the non-aggression principle? Like when I say objective, I mean I mean the opposite of subjective. I mean it doesn't change based on some transient factor, will, opinion, time of day, location in the universe, humans involved. When I say objective,
I don't think there's good reason, not like a reason. I mean reason. There's reason and logic. I don't think there's good reason to support it. I don't think the premises fall from one to the next. I think there's issues with it in terms of how it's being argued.
But when you say it's not objective, I'm trying to understand what you mean by saying it's not objective. In what way is it subjective? Like when somebody says something is not objective, isn't that the same as saying it is subjective? In what way is the NAP subjective?
Well, I mean, there's certain things ethically that we're going to both disagree on, and we're going to disagree on even with libertarians who hold the non-aggression principle to any degree. And we have subjective interpretations of those things. So I mean,
so just because there's subjective interpretations of like the scientific method, that means that the scientific method is not an objective method?
Well, no, because if you do the scientific method correctly, it comes to a conclusion it comes to conclusions that are pretty good. But again, there's people screw it up. That's fine.
So if you do the NAP correctly, is it objective?
No.
Why not?
Because it allows for things that we would all say that is bad, right? So
like what?
Firing a laser at someone's house, like a laser pointer at someone's house, right? No damage. However, that would violate the non-aggression principle, and we can't allow it.
I disagree that. I mean, we already talked about that, but I disagree that's a violation.
But if we do allow it, then we would also have to say that the same logic applies if you're not going to take into account consequentialism as an ought statement. That it also follows that we can't fire a death laser at your house and burn your house down.
I guess the last thing I'll say, then I'll.
So I mean, that's basically the reasoning that I have. Because if the non-aggression principle is you don't trespass, you don't threaten, or even if we say like, okay, the threaten thing doesn't work. We don't allow any kind of trespasses into anyone's property, no matter what the outcomes are. Then you ought not do them. And it doesn't matter if it's firing a laser pointer or if it's firing a death ray. Now, if we want to take back and say, okay, well, we take that into consideration, that's kind of a basic value that we hold. But should you or should you not do something should be kind of based on what our perceived expectations of that action should be. So if I shine a laser at your house, right, I ought not do that if I feel that laser is going to cause physical damage to your house or your property or you. Or body ownership, right?
Why not? You have no justification other than your feeling that is bad. Like you personally subjectively think that would be a bad thing to do.
Right.
So like, how can I trust you at all if your actions are governed by just what you feel is the correct course?
Well, I mean, I do it. I make it very clear what my personal ethics are.
It's fine. If it's based on like your opinion or your wit, like that can change minute by minute. No. Like tomorrow you could think the opposite is the case, and you would be using the exact same justification to hold the opposite, governing principle.
But that also applies to people who agree with the non-aggression principle. They can also change their mind as well, as did I, because I was a firm believer in the non-aggression principle. I used to advocate it all the time. In about 2012, I started reading a little bit more, found David Friedman, and I was like, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense.
The difference is if I switched from the NAP, it would be a change in philosophical fundamental principle, whereas you would not be changing your philosophical fundamental principle, which is, you act how you want. You would just be acting in a different way. Your principle wouldn't change. No. So one's a change and one's not a change.
I could change it to a thing that I think is completely objective tomorrow. And I could breathe the non-aggression principle today and go to a subjective one. Or
what I'm saying is that if both people That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if neither of us change our philosophical positions, your behavior can be totally different tomorrow with the same philosophical justifications.
No. It's
because
not true.
it's what you feel is best in the situation.
Well, I have a moral code that I follow. It's there. You can read it.
Yeah, but it's determined by what you feel is best.
No, it's determined by the rules that I set out.
But you picked those rules because that's what you felt was best.
Right. So if we're not going to change my subjective opinions about these rules, just like you're not going to change your mind about your subjective opinion about objective rules, then yeah.
This is not what I'm saying. I'm failing to communicate.
No.
I'm failing to communicate it.
Okay, say it one more time.
So if I'm justifying my actions based on an objective rule that doesn't change based on anything subjective, then tomorrow when I still hold that my behavior is governed by something that doesn't change based on anything subjective, my behavior tomorrow will be the same as today. If I'm governing my actions based on something that is subjective, like what I feel is best, then tomorrow what I feel is best could lead me to take absolutely dichotomous behavior. I could do the opposite tomorrow, and my core belief, which is behave how I think is best, would not have changed. So both people don't change their core belief. The consequentialist behavior can be 180 degrees from day to day.
So when we're talking about in terms of ethics or subjective, it's not that tomorrow I think murder is bad and today I think murder is good, right? That's not what really subjective means. It's not like I'm looking at these things and going like, you know what, today I feel like I'm going to change my mind. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about subjective rules. We're talking about like there's a bunch of different rules out there. You have the non-aggression principle. You have Kant's categorical imperative. Marx written a lot about ethics. Ayn Rand has written about ethics. Like a lot of these people have written about various different forms of ethics, and you can pick and choose which one you want, right? But at the end of the day, like our choices of those are subjective. And those rules that they're applying, even if they claim that they're objective, are not. They're still subjective. And they're trying to reason that these things are objectively true. But unfortunately, I have not found one that I think is objective. It doesn't meet the requirements to being an objectively true thing because they don't either follow from one premise to the next, or they fail to consider certain outcomes, or they fail to do certain things, or they bridge, as all of them do, bridge the is-ought gap if they're claiming to be a kind of a deontological system.
Okay. Well, if I continue talking, it's going to be saying the same thing again. So we're probably at a good endpoint.
But the overall point is that tomorrow, today, and the next day, unless I change my opinion, even to the non-aggression principle, it's going to be the same. Like I have a list of moral codes, and these are the rules that I live by. Most of the people who have read the ethics of Satanism, most of them look at it and go, "Oh, that's not bad." However, again, their opinion of that is subjective, and it's based on what the ethical system that they apply to, be it Christianity, be it Rand, be it Kant, whatever. So, at the end of the day, all ethics are just rules that we all like, and we try to rationalize the fact that we like these rules.
I don't like some of the outcomes of the non-aggression principle. That's what we've been talking about this whole time.
Right.
I don't like some of the outcomes.
Okay.
I don't like doorbell bombs. So I disagree with that premise.
Some people do like.
I don't like doorbell bombs, but I would defend someone's right to build one. Let's say, like this is anyway. So I like my only response to, without repeating myself, is just that opinions of what is best are much more easily changed than commitments to principles. Like the principle.
Well, I have principles.
What? What'd you say?
No.
I didn't hear what you said.
You can have principles. That's fine. But they're
that's what I'm saying.
Fine.
Like both are principles. I'm not saying one is principles and one is not. I'm saying behaving according to what you want is a principle. It's just one. It's just one that whose behavior can change day to day wildly without that fundamental principle changing.
But that's not what subjective ethics is talking about. That's not what we mean by subjective ethics. It's not that we think about things and go like, oh, I like this, I'm going to do this. That's not what they mean by subjective ethics.
But that is what you're doing.
We're selectively choosing the
based
rules
on
that we want to follow.
Yeah,
right?
that's what you just said the same thing twice and said that they weren't
Okay.
equal.
I'm just saying that the reasons for that people give for believing in various ethical systems, be it Christianity, be it Kant, categorical imperative, whatever you want, they're purely subjective, and people try to rationalize around that.
It's much easier to change one's behavior than it is to change one's fundamental core principle. Like if
Right,
your
and
fundamental
it's
core
just-
principle is based on doing what you want, and mine is behaving according to the non-aggression principle, then whose behavior is more consistent? Whose behavior is going to be more consistent?
Hold on. Who is saying that you can just do whatever you want, though?
You behave according to rules that are only rules for you because you want them to be so.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's what I'm saying.
That's not doing whatever you want. I'm still applying
How is that not
these
doing
rules.
whatever you want? You're making up your own rules.
Right, but
That's the same thing
no,
as
it's
doing
not.
whatever you want.
No, it's not.
How not? It's the same thing.
It's okay. So if you're going to make the claim that the non-aggression principle is objective and true, right, and not subjective, you need to make the case that it is objective and true, right?
And when I say, I make that case. It can be used by everyone in all times and all places.
And I can make the same case and say, like, look, the world that I want to live in, if everybody followed these rules, would be a whole lot better. And we can prove that through various different reasons. And we don't need to get into the Izot gap or anything. I can just say, like, these are the rules that are good, right? They may not be completely accurate, but we're all subjectively choosing what we want as an ethical system based on what we think the outcome is going to be, right? So I think that if more people were Satanists, which I don't want them to be, we don't want you, go away. But if more people would follow some rules similar to that, we could say that it would be a better society, right? And it's very similar to the non-aggression principle, though not completely.
Yeah,
And
one
it
can be
doesn't-
said
it
to be
doesn't try
usable
to
by
claim-
everyone at all times, and the other one is just whatever people think will work out best.
Right.
That's the difference. I
Right,
just
but
realized
the
that EG's
thing is-
donation was $100 freaking dollars. Holy
Oh, yeah,
crap,
that's-
EG.
that's why I was
didn't
shocked.
even see
Yeah, I was
that.
shocked.
I am shocked. Wow. Thank you so much, Peaceful Easy Feeling, whoever you are. That is epic. I can't believe I didn't catch that when it came through. Thank you so much.
All right. So
I can't believe we've almost gone 4 hours. The last thing.
I'll just wrap up with this. Is that you can predict, if you understood what my ethics were, you could predict what I would do in the vast majority of situations, and vice versa. I can look at the non-aggression principle and say, this is his interpretation of the non-aggression principle, and I can predict that if certain thing happened, he's probably going to act in a very particular way, right? Not exactly. I couldn't predict it like an 8-ball, but I can say, like, if someone is, kicking over his car, he's going to do something to stop it. All right. And we can look at his ethical system and say, like, that's probably what his choice of actions. He could break those rules or whatever.
But you can't do that with a consequentialist.
You can.
No, you can't, because your ethical rules are based on what you think is
No.
best.
My consequentialism comes in not in ethics. It comes in law.
So, I'm not talking about law. I thought I'm talking about ethics. Like, what is right and
Right.
wrong?
And
when can you
ethics
attack
is-
somebody for
my
behavior and when
ethics-
can't you?
My ethics is Satanism. That's where I get my ethics from.
Okay.
Consequentialism is my libertarianism, my legal theory. Right?
Okay. So I guess
So what the thing that I'm trying to say is that tomorrow
I feel like
could
I'm asking
change
the
my
same
mind.
questions over and over. Like, what do you base your ethics on? Like, what governs your ethical behavior? I'm not worried about legal system. Legal systems should be based on voluntary consent, and I think we both agree
My
on
religion. Yeah, my religion. That's what I base my ethical system on.
that. And what is that? Like
Satanism.
I know, but what is that?
Which has been over. Okay, so yeah, respect for individuals' property and privacy, right? To crush people who threaten to harm you. The silver rule: do unto others as they do unto you. Don't evangelize. Don't give people advice unless they ask for it. Which is why I said that's why.
This sounds like the nap with extra steps, sir.
Yeah. But then again, so is your interpretation of the nap too. So you're not okay with door
my
bombs.
interpretation is like is probably the most rawest, boiled down interpretation I've ever heard anyone else espouse. Like it's
And
not
also
the nap
threats.
with extra steps. It's just the nap. It doesn't even have threats built in. It's just the nap.
No, because the threats are included in that.
I do not include the threats in that.
Right.
And I don't like that conclusion, but I'm following the logic, not letting my feelings dictate my positions, unlike a consequentialist.
Okay. No. Consequential is my legal theory.
Okay. So what determines what makes
I
Satanism the correct ethical position then?
Ethical position?
Yeah.
It's
why is
just-
that your
it's
ethical position?
It fits in with with what I agree with.
What you think is best.
Right, yeah.
It's the same thing.
And why and again, why did you fall into the non-aggression principle?
Because it's objective and universalizable.
So when someone, so let me ask you a question. When you first found the non-aggression principle and someone told you like, there's this non-aggression principle and this is great. Did you say, well, okay, the logic works out, I'm all for it? Or did you say, but what about the roads? Or what about door bombs? What about this? What about that? Or were you asking for the consequences of those things to come into play? And then and checking those things against your subjective opinions on things. And saying, like, that kind of fits in with my sensibilities.
My path was began with almost becoming a pig, cop, Blue Line cartel member. As a form of defense against them, because the only way to not get persecuted by police is to be one of their gang members. But so that was back when I was a statist, and I started trying to follow the line of authority. I wanted to find out where the authority of the police came from. And so, that led me through this big, long philosophical journey through the founding fathers and the Constitution and natural law and natural rights. And that, led me to the Socrates and Aristotle and so I'm going and looking for the thread for the source of authority, and then of course you find that there isn't one. So then if there's no authority, then we need to find so again I'm not participating in the is-ought dichotomy. I'm simply saying we have an understanding that rights are a spook, so to speak. Like that makes it kind of seem like an insult, but it's a mutual agreement between people. And so if we realize that rights are a mutual agreement, then we need to find a thing to agree on that can be agreed on by everyone to reduce conflict as much as possible. Like,
why do we all need to agree? Why do we all need to agree? We don't need to all agree.
I'm not saying that we should, I'm not saying that we have to all agree. I'm saying that, if rights are a mutual agreement, well, what is the thing that is best? What is the optimal thing to agree on? Well, the thing that if everyone agreed on would reduce conflict to zero. I only know of one of those things. I'm open to other people being like, hey, here's the nap alternative that will also reduce conflict to zero. Okay, well, then that's an option to plug into the equation too. I haven't found that yet. So if you know something, let me know. But for it to be plugged into that equation, it's got to be objective, not subjective, not based on feelings and what we think is best. And it has to be universalizable, which means that it is possible for all people to hold it at the same time.
Okay.
Whew. That's it. That's not like an is-ought thing. It's just look, we have to agree to behave with each other. Otherwise, we are in a state of nature. We are fucking animals. And, we're clubs on an island. So if we want to elevate ourselves out of a state of nature, we have to agree. Well, what should we agree on? We got to work out the best possible thing to agree on. Why would we agree on things that would not reduce conflict to zero? That seems unintelligent. Why would we agree on something that only partially elevates us out of the animal kingdom? We have the power, we have the capacity for reason. Why shouldn't we use it to find the best possible thing to agree on? That's kind of my summary. Maybe it's a good place to end for me.
Yeah. So I think we agree more than we disagree. I think we're just kind of disagreeing a lot on, I wouldn't even say semantics, just on some of the terminology we're using. For the most part, we tend to agree on the non-aggression principle, right? Just to a lesser or greater extent.
I guess
we agree that we agree that there's things about the non-aggression principle that are not optimal, and we need to further make it better. I think we both agree on that, right?
Like I would say there's some things that I subjectively don't like, not that they're flaws with the NAP.
With threats and stuff. Yeah, right. Okay.
Well, I don't.
And like I said, like I want something like the non-aggression principle to apply, and I want something like universal ethics to be a real thing, than something to persuade me for them to be true. However, if you're gonna appeal to like maybe you can change your mind tomorrow, it's like, well, I at one point I was an app. I could change my mind about that. I could be convinced otherwise. So I mean.
Okay, well, we are right at 4 hours, so I hope all the people that have been asking me to do this for like 6 months, I hope you feel like you got what you asked for. I'm sure everybody's got a ton of questions and follow-ups. And like, look, like if I would be happy to talk to you again. I've enjoyed this, and I want to commend you on having the balls to put your ass where your mouth is. And like, look, instead of me just doing a stupid takedown video on YouTube where I chop up your video and hack and debunk it, like you came on and we had a much better discussion because of it. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Look, if I could reach my head down that far, I would never leave the house. But
understood. So anyway, thank you. I appreciate you coming on.
And I would have a bigger channel than yours on Pornhub.
Oh yeah. We have like almost 20,000 views on Pornhub. I just want to point that out. We have Disenthrall. All of my content is on Pornhub. Yeah. So thanks again for coming on, and we'll have you on again soon. We can do more of this.
Hail Satan.